before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I never thought much about the Ozarks before that summer. You hear about them in songs and stories. Rugged, wild country spread across Missouri and northern Arkansas. Lakes that go on forever. Caverns buried under old forested hills. It sounded like the kind of place RVers escape to when they want to feel something ancient pressing in around them. And maybe that's exactly what we found out there. Something ancient. Something that was never supposed to be found again. It started as a healing trip. My wife Rachel had just finished chemo. We weren't trying to escape the world, we just needed air. Quiet. A chance to remember how it felt to move without fear. We'd both grown up camping long before life turned clinical, and we thought getting back in the RV would help shake the rust off our bones and minds. I bought a used 2002 Winnebago Rialta. Compact, not flashy, just the right size to get us into more remote campgrounds without sacrificing too much comfort. We named her Olive. She had a faded green stripe down her side that reminded Rachel of old highway signs. We didn't tell many people where we were headed. I think that was part of the appeal. Just the two of us, off the grid, far from the noise and pity. Somewhere in the belly of the Ozarks, down in Arkansas, there was a small campground we'd read about on an old forum, privately run near the edge of a lake called Greer's Ferry, east of Shirley. People said it had no cell service, no hookup sites, and that it was cash only. You had to call ahead and speak to the owner, a woman named Linda who'd lived in those woods her whole life. We called. She picked up on the third ring like she'd been expecting us. "You can have site 7, she said, right by the trees. You'll hear them at night, but don't mind that. They always talk a bit before dawn." Rachel chuckled after we hung up. "They always talk a bit before dawn?" she repeated. "What does that even mean?" We figured she meant crickets, or coyotes, or maybe some old superstition locals pass around like salt at the dinner table. We weren't city folks. We didn't scare easy. The drive was long and quiet. As we curved down into the valleys, the green got darker. Pine and hickory closed in around the roads. The sky seemed to sag under the weight of the trees. We passed through towns so small they didn't have gas stations, just churches and broken vending machines standing in sun-beaten silence. By the time we reached the gravel road to the campground, it was almost dusk. A faded wooden sign marked the entrance. Briar Glen RV Retreat. The word retreat had been etched into the board with a different hand, maybe added later or after something had changed. Linda met us at the entrance with a kerosene lantern in her hand. Her eyes were cloudy, like smoke behind glass, and her voice had the rasp of someone who used to smoke and never stopped trying to quit. She was kind, though. Gave us a map of the campgrounds, hand-drawn with symbols instead of labels. Little spirals where the trees were thickest, a triangle to mark the bathhouse, a faded red X deep in the woods to the west, which she wouldn't explain. "Don't follow the lake edge past the white oaks," she told me while I was unhooking the propane. "You'll end up going in circles." I didn't ask questions. We were tired. We just wanted to set up and rest. Site 7 was up on a slight rise overlooking a bend in the lake. No other RVs in sight. No sound except frogs chirping and water slapping softly against the shore. We grilled some vegetables and played cards in the soft yellow light of the cabin. Rachel wore her knit cap even though the air was warm. Her skin had gained a little color since the hospital. Around 2 a.m., I woke up sweating. The air was thick, like it hadn't moved in hours. Olive's little fan had stopped turning. I looked out the window and felt off. The lake below shimmered slightly, but it wasn't the moon. There were no clouds, no stars, just this ambient glow, soft and pulsating like something was breathing under the water. Then I heard it, whispering. Not voices, exactly, but a sound that was shaped like speech, like someone speaking just below the range of comprehension. The hair on my neck stood up. I thought maybe it was water sloshing or the wind in the trees, but there was no wind, not a branch moved. I stepped outside in my boots and boxers, flashlight in hand. The whispering stopped the moment I hit the bottom step. I scanned the tree line. Nothing. But I noticed something strange. There were small, perfectly round stones stacked beside our fire pit. I hadn't seen them when we arrived. They were dry, smooth, placed carefully like someone had built a cairn to mark a trail or a grave. The next morning, I asked Rachel if she'd heard anything. She said, "I had a weird dream. You were standing at the edge of the trees and something was behind you, something tall. I couldn't move." We laughed it off nervously, but that second night the whispering came again, louder, and this time it said my name. Not clearly, not with a voice I recognized, but I heard the shape of it, bent through the wind like someone calling across a canyon. My flashlight flickered as I swung it toward the sound, but again, nothing. Just the stacked stones, only now there were more of them, 3 piles instead of 1, each about a foot tall. I didn't wake Rachel, I didn't want to scare her. But when I turned around to go back inside, I saw something move at the edge of the woods. It wasn't walking, it slid. A tall, thin shape, grayish, not quite solid. My eyes wanted to interpret it as smoke, but it had weight, presence, like it was aware I'd seen it. Then it was gone. The next morning, the bathhouse mirror was shattered. A large rock had been thrown through the window. No other campers were around. In fact, we hadn't seen a single person in the campground since we'd arrived. Just Linda, and that was on the first day. Rachel found a small bundle of twigs tied with red thread beside our steps. Inside was a tooth, human-looking, mottled yellow with a crack running down the middle. She didn't tell me until later. She just quietly tucked it into a plastic bag and stuffed it in the glove compartment. She was trying to protect me. I know that now. But that third night, we couldn't protect each other anymore because that's the night we left Olive behind. And we ran. That third night, the air never cooled. It pressed down on us like a fever, thick and metallic. I remember the smell before anything else, wet stone and burning bark like a forest after lightning strikes it. Rachel sat upright around midnight, gasping like she'd been drowning in her dreams. She looked at me with this hollow, unfamiliar stare, and for a moment I thought she didn't recognize me. Then we both heard it. Not a whisper this time. A knock. Not on the door, not on the RV. It came from the ground. 3 distinct thuds, dull and deliberate, like someone tapping from under the earth. It was so loud, it rattled a mug in the sink. I froze, staring at the floor. Rachel clutched my wrist. I opened the blinds, just a crack. Outside, the moonlight had turned yellow, not white, not silver. It glowed sickly, like something had stained the sky. Every tree beyond the fire pit looked warped, tilted slightly toward us like they were leaning in, and the stones, the cairns, were gone. In their place was a line of bones, clean, arranged in a perfect arc that wrapped around Olive's front end, almost like a smile. I could make out a deer skull among them, hollow eyes aimed directly at our windshield. Rachel whispered, "It's not a dream, is it?" I shook my head. We didn't speak again. We just started packing, quiet and frantic. I remember unplugging the propane tank, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the wrench twice. The smell of rusted metal filled the air. I didn't even check the side mirrors. We just fired up the engine and started backing out of Site 7, headlights cutting a path through the dense black trees. We didn't make it far. About a quarter mile down the gravel road, Olive stalled. No warning, no sputter, just silence. Everything died at once. Lights, radio, engine, even the dash went dark. I turned the key. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. Rachel started crying. Not loud, just this soft, terrified sound I'll never forget, like the last thread of belief snapping in someone's chest. We were surrounded by forest on both sides. The gravel road narrowed so sharply I couldn't even do a full turnaround. That's when the fog rolled in, thick and green-gray, so fast it felt unnatural. Within seconds we couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. Then came the scraping. From the woods, low, sharp, rhythmic, like claws against bark. 1, 2, 3, a pause, then again, closer, and then the whisper returned. But this time, it wasn't in the air. It was inside the RV. Every word scratched the inside of my skull like it was being written there with fingernails. I couldn't understand the language, if it even was a language, but it meant something. It felt like a command, a demand, a warning. It filled every corner of the space until I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Rachel screamed. She was looking at the back window. I turned just in time to see it. A shape pressed against the glass, not a face, not fully, just the impression of one. No eyes, no mouth. just a warped outline, like the silhouette of a man viewed underwater, tall, twisted, impossibly thin. Then it vanished. I grabbed the emergency flashlight and kicked the side door open. We ran. We didn't grab anything. Not phones, not wallets, not even Rachel's medication. Just ran blindly into the fog, crashing through underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. I didn't know where the hell we were going. I just knew I needed to put space between us and that campground. I heard something chasing us. I didn't see it, but I heard it. Fast, but not human. It didn't crash through the woods like we did. It slid, smooth and fast, never breaking a twig or rustling a leaf. Always behind. Always just far enough back that I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Watching. Hurting us. Eventually, we reached a clearing. An old, rotting picnic table stood in the center, half swallowed by moss. The moonlight broke through here, but it wasn't yellow anymore. It was pale, cold. The air smelled cleaner. The whispering was gone. Rachel collapsed to her knees, sobbing. I dropped beside her, lungs heaving like bellows. That's when I noticed the carving on the table. Burned into the surface were 3 words, etched deep with a knife or branding iron. Leave it behind. That's when it hit me. It didn't want us. It wanted Olive. The RV. That old Rialta was the only thing we'd brought into those woods that didn't belong. The only thing that carried pieces of another world, plastic wiring, tanks of gas, electrical circuits, food from other states, noise, disruption, unnatural. Whatever lived out there, it didn't tolerate intruders, not permanent ones. I looked at Rachel and said, "We're not going back." She nodded, and that's how we left our RV to rot in the Ozarks. By dawn, we found a service road. It looked like it hadn't been driven in years, half grown with grass and low saplings, but it was real, tangible. A way out. We followed it for hours, Rachel limping from a twisted ankle, me half carrying her when the pain got too bad. Neither of us spoke much. We were too scared that speaking might bring it back. That voice in the trees, that scraping in the dark. We finally saw power lines around noon, then a trailer with rusted siding and a tilted satellite dish. An old man came out with a shotgun tucked under his arm. He didn't raise it, just looked at us like he already knew where we'd come from. "You from Briar Glen?" he asked. I didn't answer, just nodded. He spat into the grass and motioned us up onto the porch. "You made it farther than most." He gave us water. Let us use his radio to call a tow service from the next town over. When I told the dispatcher where the RV had broken down, her voice went tight. "That's near the lake, ain't it?" she said. "We don't send trucks down there anymore, not since 2019. I asked why. She just said, "Too many don't come back." So we left it. Olive was never recovered. They sent a sheriff's deputy out to take a look, but he called it off after 10 minutes. Said the road past the first bend had been swallowed by mudslides. No sign of the vehicle, no sign of Site 7. Said we must have gotten turned around, imagined things. But Rachel and I both remembered the same details. The map, the stacked stones, the shape in the glass, the wordless whisper that coiled around our thoughts like a noose. And we remembered leaving it behind. The only thing we had to leave behind to survive. You might think we were hallucinating. Sleep deprived, stressed out from medical trauma. I've gone over every logical explanation, believe me. We were careful, we weren't on drugs, we didn't touch any weird plants or drink bad water. That place was real. What lived there was real, and it didn't want to be seen. A month later, back at home, we got a letter. No stamp, just sitting on our doorstep one morning. The envelope was damp, the paper inside warped from moisture. It read, "You left it behind, good." No signature, no return address. Nothing else. Rachel didn't say a word. She just burned it in the kitchen sink. That was 2 years ago. We haven't been back to the Ozarks since, but sometimes I still hear that voice, usually just before sleep, just a soft whisper brushing the inside of my skull. It says my name in a way no human ever would, like it knows me, like it marked me. And the scariest part, it doesn't sound angry. It sounds curious, like it's still watching, waiting. We tried to move on. That's what people always say, right? Move on, let go. But you don't move on from something like that. You bury it deep, and you pray it doesn't start whispering again. Rachel started gardening, said it helped her stay grounded, kept her hands moving. I spent my days restoring old lanterns and vintage camping gear. Anything simple, analog, safe. No screens, No circuits. I didn't even open the glove compartment of our car for weeks because that's where the tooth was still sitting, sealed in a plastic bag, quietly waiting to remind me that not everything we left behind had stayed there. Then, one night that fall, something changed. It was just after the first frost. I'd gone to bed early, but Rachel couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she shook me awake, pale as chalk, whispering one word over and over, "Look." I followed her into the kitchen. The front window was open. We don't leave windows open, ever, especially not in the cold. But it wasn't the draft that made me sit down hard in the nearest chair. It was the small, perfectly round stones lined up on the sill. 4 of them, stacked in 2 little piles, neat, dry, balanced so carefully they should have toppled with the breeze. But they didn't. They didn't even wobble. I went outside with a flashlight, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the crickets. I searched the yard, the sidewalk, the bushes. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone. No tracks in the frost. Just the smell again, that sharp mineral tang like wet stone and scorched pine needles. I didn't sleep that night. Rachel sat by the window with a knife in her hand, staring at the stones until dawn. When the light finally broke, she swept them into a towel and tossed them in the fire pit out back. We watched them burn. But stones don't burn, do they? These did. They cracked and hissed like wet wood, splitting in the flames. A thick, foul-smelling smoke curled up into the air and hung there long after the fire had gone out. That's when I knew we weren't done with it. Not even close. We called a friend, a retired park ranger named Kevin, who had spent 30 years between Arkansas and Missouri. He was the kind of guy who didn't flinch at rattlesnakes or cougar sightings. Always had a story about something weird in the woods, though he never seemed to believe them himself. Until we told him ours. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, just leaned back, rubbed his jaw and said, "You saw it too, huh?" I asked him what it was. He looked at Rachel, then back at me, then leaned in close. "There are places in the Ozarks where the land doesn't belong to us," he said. "Never did. Locals talk about things out there, spirits, guardians, watchers. Some say they're remnants from before we had language to name them, before we drew borders and lit fires and called ourselves safe." He paused. "I've been near Briar Glen. Once. Never again." We asked him what he saw. He just said, "It remembers faces. That's why you need to go back." I felt my stomach drop. "Go back? You mean to the campsite?" "No," Kevin said. "Go back to where it found you, to where you first felt it watching. You left something behind, and not just the RV." I knew what he meant. The tooth. Rachel went pale. She stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and came back holding the glove compartment bag. The plastic was cloudy now. The tooth inside yellowed deeper, like it had aged 50 years in 2. It was cracked worse than before. Black lines spiderwebbing across the enamel. Kevin took one look at it and said, "That's not from a deer or a bear, and it's not old. Whatever left that for you, it wanted you to know it can reach you." That's when the panic started. The lights in the kitchen flickered. The air turned cold enough to fog the windows. Every faucet in the house began to drip. Just once, at the same time. Plink, 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 like a ticking clock made of water. Rachel dropped the bag on the table. That's when I heard it again. Faint. Almost polite. A whisper. From under the floorboards. My name. Rachel's name. Then silence. Kevin didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was low and steady. "Whatever you brought back," he said, "it doesn't want to punish you. It wants to follow. It's curious, maybe even grateful. You gave it something. Time. Witness. Attention." He looked at the cracked tooth. "But now it wants to know what else you'll give." We burned the tooth that night. The smoke turned green. The flame hissed like it was trying to speak. And Rachel, God help me, Rachel smiled. Just for a second, like she heard something that made sense. I didn't mention the smile right away. How could I? It was gone in an instant, like it had never happened. Rachel looked like herself again, frightened, pale, clinging to the hem of her sweatshirt with both hands. But I'd seen it. A flicker of calm, almost relief, when that smoke rose from the tooth, like she'd heard something she'd been waiting for. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No more stones, no more whispers. The faucets stopped ticking. The lights stayed on. The lights stayed on. It was like we'd paid our dues and someone had moved on. I told myself we were free, but I didn't believe it. Not really. because there was a pressure in the house now, like being watched from just outside your vision. The corners of the rooms felt darker, the hallway longer. Doors creaked at night that had never creaked before. And Rachel? She started standing by the back window for hours, just staring, sometimes whispering under her breath. I asked her what she was saying once, and she shook her head. I'm not saying anything, she told me. I'm listening. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to run, but from what? Our house? The land? Our own memory? That thing from the campground hadn't just haunted our past. It had followed us home. I started researching Briar Glen again. There was almost nothing online anymore. The forums where we first found it? Gone. The campground's name didn't appear on any official Arkansas state camping directories either. I called the number we used originally. Disconnected. I found a small group of RVers on an old subreddit talking about cursed campgrounds in the Ozarks. One name kept coming up. Shite 7. People mentioned weird lights, missing time, people who went in but never checked out. One user said they'd found stone piles shaped like rib cages in a dry creek bed. Another talked about a child's voice whispering from inside their camper vents at 2 a.m. But the posts were always removed within hours. Someone didn't want the story told. Kevin called again 3 days later. He didn't bother with pleasantries. It's getting stronger, isn't it? He asked. I didn't say yes. I didn't have to. He told me he'd been speaking with an old tribal historian from Missouri who had grown up hearing stories about forest witnesses, beings that weren't exactly spirits, not exactly creatures, something older. Some said they were memories of the land itself, walking in physical form. Others believed they were guardians of sacred boundaries that had long since been trampled by tourists and trailers. You didn't just break into its world, Kevin told me. You acknowledged it, and it doesn't forget that. He paused before saying what he'd really called for. I think it's choosing Rachel. I nearly dropped the phone. What the hell does that mean? But Kevin didn't explain. He just said, there's a ritual, a kind of offering. You don't make it to get rid of the thing. You make it to understand it, to let it pass through you instead of around you. It's old, older than language. I asked what the offering was. He told me, a personal artifact wrapped in linen buried at the base of an unaltered white oak. No trail, no cuts, no tire tracks. You had to find one on foot, alone. And the item had to carry memory, deep, emotional memory. It had to mean something. Rachel had already packed her father's compass. I found it in the linen drawer, wrapped tight and tied with red thread. She hadn't said a word. When I confronted her, she just looked at me with eyes I didn't quite recognize. He always wanted me to see the world, she said softly. Now I can. All of it. Even the parts no one's supposed to. That night, she was gone. Took the compass, a canteen, and one of our old sleeping bags. Left before dawn. I found her boots missing by the front door. Her side of the bed cold. No note. No phone. Just a single cairn on the front porch. This time there were 5 stones, and underneath them was a lock of her hair. I lost it. I drove to the nearest state park, started hiking off trail like a madman, calling her name, slipping in the mud, tearing my hands on brambles. I searched all day, shouting, cursing, crying into the trees. At sunset I found a white oak. It was massive, untouched. Not a single carving, not a single limb sawn off, and at its base a fresh mound of turned soil. I fell to my knees and started digging. My hands hit linen. I pulled it out, frantic. It wasn't the compass. It was a photograph. Me and Rachel. Taken the day we bought Olive. She was smiling, but not for the camera. Smiling at something just over my shoulder. In the background, deep in the shadow between trees, was a shape. Barely visible, like smoke or mist, but tall and watching. I sat at the base of that white oak for what must have been hours. The photo rested in my lap, half covered in dirt and pine needles. The image was old now, aged in a way it hadn't been just days before. The colors had gone flat, the paper curled and worn like it'd been buried for years. But Rachel's smile, it hadn't faded. I stared at the shape behind us, that faint outline of something tall and silent, nested in the dark between trees. It wasn't just watching us, it had been there from the beginning. I hadn't seen it then, none of us had. But it was already with us, standing in the background of our memories. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. Not knowing she was still out here, somewhere in the folds of a forest that didn't follow the same rules we did. I curled up under the white oak with the photograph tucked into my jacket and stared up at the branches until sleep dragged me down like a stone into deep water. And in that sleep, I saw her. Not Rachel as she was, but Rachel becoming. She walked barefoot through mist, the trees parting for her like old friends. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes shimmered with a kind of understanding I'd never seen in her before. She didn't speak, but she looked at me, and somehow I heard the words, "You were never supposed to stay." Then she vanished into the trees, and I woke with soil in my mouth and blood on my hands from clawing at the earth in my sleep. When I finally did go home, it was like stepping into a ghost version of our life. Rachel's mug was still in the sink, her garden gloves by the door, her scent on the pillow. But it all felt paused, like a stage set after the actors have gone home. Nothing had moved. Not the cairn on the porch, not the whisper beneath the floorboards. But every so often, when the house was perfectly still, I'd hear something. A sound that didn't belong in a house. Something gliding, soft and deliberate, like a footstep that never quite touches the ground. I started hearing it outside the house too, in grocery stores, at the mechanic. Sometimes walking the aisles of an RV dealership, staring blankly at the glossy, fluorescent-lit shells of vehicles we once found freedom in. It was like something had attached itself to me, not malevolent, not violent, just present, like I had become a part of its ecosystem. And that's when I realized I had brought it with me, not in the tooth, not in the stones, in my attention. That's all it ever wanted, to be noticed, to be remembered. It didn't need shrines or chants or blood rituals. It needed eyes, a story. A voice to carry it into the places it couldn't go, and I had done exactly that. Rachel wasn't lost. She had gone willingly, not because she was possessed, not because she was tricked, but because she understood what I hadn't, that this thing, whatever it was as much a part of the world as gravity or rot or memory. And in her own way, she had joined it, given herself over not as a victim, but as a witness. Weeks later, I returned to the Ozarks, alone. I didn't bring a vehicle. No GPS, no phone, just a pack, a compass, and the photograph. It took me 2 days of wandering through terrain I should have been hopelessly lost in before I found it. Site 7, or what was left of it. There were no tire tracks, no gravel, no fire pit, just a circle in the woods where no trees grew, too perfectly round to be natural. At the center stood a cairn taller than me, stones bleached white and stacked with inhuman precision. And at the top of the cairn was Rachel's knit cap, untouched by rain, not a single leaf on it, like it had just been placed. I don't remember crying. I remember breathing, this deep chest-rattling exhale, like I hadn't really drawn breath in months, like I'd been holding something poisonous inside me, afraid to let it out. I placed the photograph at the base of the cairn, whispered her name, and turned to leave, but I heard her, soft, behind me. "Thank you." And then, wind. For the first time in days, cold and clean, sweeping through the trees in one long sigh. Since then, I've been back once a year. I don't camp, I don't bring a camera, I just walk, quietly, carefully, and I listen. Because I understand now. There are places in this country, maybe in this world, that were never meant to be fully known, not mapped, not owned, not lit up with string lights and generators and Instagram hashtags. Places that remember themselves whether we do or not. And sometimes if you're not careful, they'll remember you too. This is not a warning, it's a reckoning. The Ozarks will take care of their own. But if you go there seeking something, solitude, escape, healing, you better ask yourself one question. Are you willing to give something back? Because the land remembers, and the land chooses. I should have trusted my gut when the battery died for no reason. It wasn't a warning light. It wasn't some slow fade out of functionality. It was like the soul of the RV had just left. 1 minute we were coasting down a dusty back road in Wyoming, maybe 10 or 12 miles from the base of Devil's Tower. And the next, every dial dropped, the dash lights went out, and the engine went quiet like it had given up all at once. No sputter, no cough, just nothing. I can still remember the silence that followed. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Empty in a way that made my ears ring. There was no wind, no bird call, no passing vehicles, just a strange, echoing kind of quiet, like the world was holding its breath and waiting for something to happen. My name's Dean. I'm 42 from Reno, Nevada, and I've been RV camping for over a decade. My wife, Carrie, and I have driven all over the country in our 99 Gulfstream. She's old, but she runs solid, or at least she used to. We'd been planning a trip to the Dakotas, loop through Montana, see Glacier, and hit Yellowstone on the way back. Devil's Tower wasn't even on our route. Not really. Carrie had seen it in Close Encounters and wanted to stop. "Just for a quick look," she said. I didn't argue. That's the thing. I should have. I should have pushed back harder. It wasn't that I had anything against the place, but something about it always made me feel off. Like it wasn't really part of the rest of the earth. Like it had come from somewhere else and just forced itself into the landscape. Even from 20 miles out, you could see it rising out of the plains. That massive volcanic plug, sheer-sided and smooth, like a monolith punched through the soil by something ancient. I didn't say all that to Carrie. I just said I felt uneasy, and she teased me. She said I was just getting grumpy because we were behind schedule. I laughed it off. I didn't laugh when the engine cut out. I pulled over to the shoulder as best I could with the remaining momentum. The gravel crunched under the tires, and when we stopped, I sat there for a few seconds, hands still on the wheel, just listening. Carrie was quiet. She's not usually quiet when something breaks. She's a worrier. But she didn't say anything. She just stared out the passenger window, eyes locked on the tower in the distance. "Can you check the battery?" she asked after a long minute, not looking at me. "Yeah," I said, and climbed out. It wasn't just the battery. The entire electrical system was dead. Even the emergency flashers wouldn't come on. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Not even a click. I don't claim to be a master mechanic, but I've handled dead batteries before. This wasn't dead. It was wiped. Like everything had been drained or shorted in a single second. I checked the sky. It was clear. Sunset was an hour away, but already the shadows from the tower stretched long and deep across the land. There's a strange texture to that place in the early evening. Everything feels closer, like the horizon presses in. You'd expect big, wide country to feel open. Not here. Here, the land seems to watch you back. I got back in the RV and explained what I saw. Carrie didn't react much. She kept staring at the tower. "You ever hear about those stories?" she asked, still quiet. "About the light? What light?" She didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Never mind." There's nothing more unsettling than someone saying, "Never mind," right after saying something cryptic about where you're stuck. I climbed into the back and grabbed the emergency radio. It was one of those hand-crank kinds that doesn't rely on batteries. Even it gave me trouble at first, like it didn't want to turn on. When it finally did, all I got was static. Then a sound cut through the static, a high-pitched beep. Not a signal, not a weather report, just beep, like a radar ping, spaced perfectly, repeating, unchanging. Not even a station ID. I turned it off. We decided to stay the night. There was nothing else to do. No cell signal, no passing cars, and we didn't feel like hiking 10 miles in the dark to the nearest road. I cooked some instant noodles with the little propane stove and tried to keep things light. Carrie didn't eat much. She stayed near the window, kept looking up toward the tower. It's hard to describe how massive that thing is until you're close. Even at a distance, it dominates your view. The way it rises, straight up, not like a hill, but like something artificial, it doesn't look natural. Not really. You feel it more than see it. I went outside just after sunset to take a leak. The air was cold, way colder than it should have been for early September. I zipped up my hoodie and looked up. That's when I noticed there weren't any stars, not even one. I'm not talking cloud cover, I'm saying it was clear. No mist, no haze, and the sky above us was just dark, pitch black, like someone had pulled a curtain over the world. The edges of the sky near the horizon had stars, but directly above us, nothing. I went back inside, locked the door behind me. It was around 1 a.m. when it started. I wasn't asleep. Carrie had finally laid down in the back, but I was sitting up front, flipping through the emergency manual for the RV, trying to understand what could have caused the failure. That's when I heard it. A low humming sound, far off at first, like distant machinery. Not like an engine, more like a resonance. Then the humming grew louder. The air pressure inside the RV changed. My ears popped. I stood suddenly dizzy. The lights, which had been dead for hours, flickered once, just once. Then darkness again. Carrie called out from the back. "Did you feel that?" I was about to answer when the beam hit. It wasn't like light from a spotlight. It didn't glow. It scanned. That's the best word I have for it. Like it reached down from the sky in a long, narrow shaft, pure white, no diffusion, and moved across the plains with mechanical precision. It wasn't searching. It was mapping, measuring. It passed over the RV. The moment it did, my skin prickled. Not just from heat or static. I felt it, deep, like something brushing against the surface of my thoughts. Carrie started screaming. I turned toward the back and saw her hovering 2 feet off the bed. I wish I was exaggerating. I wish there was some other way to explain it. But she was lifted. Her arms were stiff at her sides, fingers twitching, eyes rolled back. Her whole body was vibrating like she was caught in some kind of current. I ran to her. The second I grabbed her shoulders, the beam moved on, shifted to the left, and lit up the trees 100 yards away. Carrie dropped like a rag doll. She started sobbing, couldn't speak, just curled into a ball, shaking. I pulled her close and wrapped her in a blanket. Her skin was ice cold. Her lips were turning blue. The light continued its path, smooth, deliberate. Then it vanished. Not faded. Vanished. Silence returned. Total. Crushing. No wind, no insects, not even the sound of the earth moving. I sat there on the floor, holding Carrie, too afraid to move, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that light was, it hadn't just scanned us, it had chosen us. Carrie didn't speak again for almost 2 hours. She just lay there in a shivering heap while I held her, trying to keep us both warm. The heat hadn't come back, and outside the temperature had dropped below freezing. In early September, we were bundled in every blanket we had, but that cold had a strange quality to it. Like it wasn't just temperature, it felt intentional. Like the air was being drained of energy, drained of movement, drained of life. And still, the stars didn't return. I kept looking out the little window above the kitchenette, expecting them to blink back into place. But it stayed pitch black, like someone had smothered the night sky with a tarp, and behind it, something else watched us. When the sky finally started to change, not brighten exactly, but shift, I noticed it first by the edges, a slow seep of gray on the eastern horizon. Then a mist, thin at first, then rolling in thick, low across the ground like dry ice. I stepped outside, I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to believe daylight would make it all better. That this was just one of those freak camping experiences people talk about later, laugh over, joke about on podcasts. But as soon as I opened that RV door, I knew we weren't in anything ordinary. The ground didn't feel right. I stepped down, and the gravel beneath my boots gave slightly, like stepping onto a mattress. It should have been solid, hard-packed dirt and stone, but it felt almost swollen, saturated, like something had been absorbed into it. The grass near the ditch had wilted and turned a pale bluish gray. All the crickets and cicadas that should have been chirping were gone. It felt like everything had stopped living out there. The mist hugged the earth like a second skin, not swirling, not drifting, just laying there. I walked maybe 20 yards from the RV, heart pounding, eyes locked on the tower in the distance. I couldn't see it anymore. Not through the fog, but I could feel it. You don't realize how much presence that formation has until you can't see it anymore and still know exactly where it is. I swear it was closer. I know how crazy that sounds, but my internal sense of it, the weight of it, the draw of it, had changed, like a magnet on the edge of your awareness, like it had shifted just a little bit forward during the night, like it had moved. I turned back toward the RV, but something made me stop. A smell. It wasn't strong, just subtle enough to unsettle, like ozone and burned hair and iron, like the air after lightning, but deeper, more organic. It was everywhere. I held my breath, trying not to inhale it, and backed up. When I stepped inside the RV again, Carrie was sitting upright in the bed, wide-eyed. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Something's in the fog," she whispered. I looked at her and tried to stay calm. "What do you mean?" She didn't blink. "I heard them when you went outside." "Voices?" She nodded. No words, just tones, like talking, but wrong, too fast, too sharp, and something was brushing against the walls, like it was circling. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I looked out the window again. The fog pressed up against the glass like it had shape, density, not smoke, not vapor, more like fabric, like something hanging over the world. That's when I noticed the footprints, just barely, along the edge of the RV in the soft dirt near the back tire. They weren't shoe prints. They were narrow, deep, with 3 long grooves like claws dragging behind each step. They ran in a full circle around us, close. Whatever had walked there had come up to the vehicle, touched it. We needed to leave. Now. I went back to the driver's seat and tried the ignition again. To my shock, the panel lit up. Not fully, not like normal, but the dash flickered faintly to life. I turned the key. The engine groaned, coughed, died. I tried again, another flicker, and then the radio blared without warning. A static howl burst from the speakers, followed by that same slow beep, beep from the night before. Then it cut to a voice, not English, not anything I recognized, just a garbled, layered language that sounded like it had been recorded backward and played through a rusted tape deck. Carrie screamed, her hands clamped over her ears. I shut the engine off. The radio died with it, and I just sat there, afraid to move, afraid to even breathe too loudly. That's when we saw it. A shape just beyond the mist, too tall to be a person, maybe 9-10 feet. Thin. Not gaunt, just long. Every limb stretched just slightly too far. It didn't move at first, it just stood there, silhouetted by the weak morning light bleeding through the fog, and then it twitched. It didn't walk. It glided, across the field, toward us. I didn't think. I ran to the back, grabbed Carrie's hand and dragged her to the door. I had one thought, run to the road. I didn't know if someone would come by, but I knew staying here was worse than taking our chances. We hit the gravel fast. Our boots crunched over the weird, spongy dirt as we pushed through the fog. Behind us, the RV groaned. A long metallic shriek echoed, not like metal bending, but like the entire frame of the vehicle being crushed slowly. Carrie didn't either. The road was maybe a quarter mile away. We made it to the barbed wire fence and scrambled over. Carrie cut her palm. Blood dripped into the dirt. I turned to help her, and that's when the light came back. But this time, it wasn't a beam, it was a circle. A dome of pale, quivering white light that erupted over the RV like a shield. It rose 50 feet into the air and then collapsed inward, swallowing the vehicle whole. A concussive pop followed, not a boom, not an explosion. More like the air had been snapped shut. The RV was gone, just gone. Not wreckage, not fire, gone. We collapsed by the road, panting, staring at the place where it had stood. There was a perfect black circle scorched into the dirt where the RV had been. No other marks, no signs of the tires, no ash, just that circle. And just then, only then, did the stars come back, as if whatever had happened was finally finished with us, as if it had taken what it came for. The blackened circle in the dirt didn't steam, didn't smoke. It just stayed, like a wound the land wasn't allowed to close. Carrie and I sat on the edge of the road, shaking, our backs to the empty field. I remember pressing my hand against the ground to try to calm myself, and the dirt was warm, unnaturally warm, as if it had been exposed to a furnace no one could see. We didn't talk, not at first. There was nothing to say. My brain kept searching for explanations. Weather balloon, military test, radiation leak, all of it felt like wrapping duct tape around a shattered bone, pointless, cosmetic. Deep down, I knew we'd crossed a boundary, stumbled into something meant to stay hidden, and it had seen us. Eventually, a rancher found us, just after noon. His old Chevy rumbled up the road, kicking dust into the air. He saw us, slowed, and leaned out the window. "You folks all right?" he asked. I couldn't answer. Carrie was curled up on the gravel, her face hidden against her knees. The man took one look at the empty field behind us, the way we were trembling, and he didn't ask anything else. He drove us into Hewlett, a tiny town about 10 miles east. We sat in silence in the back of his pickup while the wind whipped through our clothes. I couldn't stop scanning the sky. The man dropped us off at a gas station, called the sheriff himself, said he'd found 2 wanderers near Devil's Tower and they weren't right in the head. I didn't blame him. I wouldn't have believed us either. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, gray hair, tan uniform, polite smile, but there was something guarded in his eyes the second he heard where we'd been. "You said your vehicle disappeared?" he asked carefully. I nodded. We camped just off the gravel stretch near the eastern flats, right before the road splits. He hesitated, looked down, jotted something on a notepad. You folks go off-road? No, I said. The RV just died. We pulled off. He stared at me a little too long. Then he said, you know how many calls I get about Devil's Tower? I didn't respond. He leaned in a little closer. 0. You know why? I shook my head. Because people don't call, he said. Not after. They either disappear or pretend nothing happened. But you folks, you stayed put. That's rare. That's when I realized something. He wasn't skeptical. He knew. He just didn't want it written down. He didn't take a formal statement, didn't ask for a drawn map, just offered to drive us to a motel and said he'd look into it. He didn't write anything down after that. I asked if he'd had any similar reports. He paused, then said, sometimes cattle go missing. That was all. The motel was a 1950s holdover, sun-bleached and sagging, run by a woman named Dell, who didn't blink when she saw Carrie's bandaged hand or the dried blood on her jeans. She just handed over a key and said, room 4. Clean towels are already in there. We didn't sleep that night either. Carrie finally spoke sometime after midnight. Her voice was raw, like she hadn't used it in days. I think it marked us. I turned over in the motel bed. What do you mean? She stared at the ceiling. I think it knew I was afraid. And it liked it. I didn't know how to respond. My instinct was to soothe her, to push back, to say it wasn't true, but I couldn't lie to her anymore. Not after what we'd seen. I said nothing, just reached out and held her hand. She flinched. Later, after I dozed off, I woke to the sound of her whispering. Not to me, to something else. I sat up. Carrie? She didn't move. Her lips were moving, eyes open, staring at the curtain-covered window. Her voice was soft, rhythmic, like she was reciting something she didn't understand. I touched her shoulder and she snapped awake, gasping. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. The next morning, we left. Didn't even wait for the complimentary breakfast. Caught a Greyhound out of Gillette and rode it all the way to Denver. I didn't look back. You think that's where the story ends, but it's not. Because the next week, Carrie disappeared. She got up in the middle of the night, no coat, no shoes, and walked out the front door. I was out cold, exhausted, thinking we were safe. The cameras caught her walking calmly down the driveway into the dark. We live outside Loveland, Colorado. Rural, but not empty. I searched all morning. Police searched. Bloodhounds, drones, the whole deal. They found nothing. Not a single track. No scent. No signs of a struggle. The only thing left behind was the smell. That same faint trace of ozone, iron, and burning hair that lingered around the RV. That was 5 months ago. I've been alone ever since. I started sleeping with the lights on, windows covered, doors locked with chains I installed myself, and every night around 3:30, I hear the hum again. It doesn't come from inside the house, it comes from above it. That same low-frequency resonance, like the air outside is vibrating. Sometimes I go outside with a flashlight, I scan the sky, I tell myself I'm not afraid. But I am. Because the stars above my house don't twinkle anymore. They just watch. One night I left a voice recorder running on the roof, just to be sure. I couldn't fall asleep anyway. The next morning I played it back. The hum was there. It started at exactly 3:33 a.m. and continued for 4 minutes and 44 seconds. But at the end, just before the recorder died, there was a sound, a voice, whispered, too fast, too quiet, slowed it down by 50%. I wish I hadn't. Because when I slowed it down, the words were in English, clear, precise. It said, "She came willingly, you will too." I threw the recorder into the river the next day, but it didn't matter, because the next time I looked in the mirror, really looked, I saw something behind my eyes, a shimmer, a glow I didn't recognize. And some nights when I close them, I see the tower, closer than it should be, like it's waiting for me to return, like it never let me leave. You want to know why I'm telling you all this? Because last night, I saw Carrie again. Not in a dream, not in a hallucination, not in some grief-warped corner of my mind. She was standing in my driveway, right outside the garage door, barefoot, wearing the same torn flannel and jeans she disappeared in. But something was wrong. Her posture was too straight. Her arms hung stiff at her sides. She didn't blink, she didn't breathe. She just stared through the front window, face blank, eyes glassy like lake water before a storm. I turned on every light in the house, locked all 3 deadbolts, called the police. While I was waiting for them to pick up, she turned and walked into the woods at the edge of the property, the same woods that lead to nothing for miles. By the time the cruiser arrived, there were no footprints, not even in the soft dirt. The deputy gave me a long look when I told him what I saw, not disbelief, just that same quiet resignation I'd seen on the sheriff's face in Wyoming. "If she comes back," he said, "you call this number directly. Don't wait." He didn't ask what happened to us. He already knew. So now I live my life waiting. Every night, I sit in the kitchen listening to the hum. I keep a packed bag by the door. I've stopped using my phone. It makes a high-pitched tone sometimes when the light returns, like a warning only it understands. I've seen the sky flicker. Not the whole sky, just a section of it, like a curtain rippling in a wind I can't feel. I've watched birds avoid the airspace above my house. They fly around it, like there's something hovering there, cloaked, watching. And I don't sleep anymore. Not really, because when I do, I dream of a corridor, black walls, curved, seamless, alive, and I'm floating through it. I don't have a body in the dream, just awareness. I hear a pulse, slow, rhythmic, like a heart that isn't mine. And at the end of that corridor, there's a shape, a silhouette I recognize even though I've never seen it clearly. It has too many joints, no face, just a long, smooth head and arms that stretch too far. Every time I reach it, I wake up. And every time I wake up, something has changed. A light left on that I never turned on, a clock reset, a door unlocked. Once, the back gate was swinging open, a gate I padlocked every night. I started putting flour on the floor. One morning, there were 3 lines through it, narrow, dragging trails like claws. And there's one more thing I haven't told anyone. I've started speaking in my sleep. I didn't know until I recorded myself again, against my better judgment. I needed to know. It's not English, not at first, but when I slow it down, it matches the voice on the first recording. The one that whispered, "She came willingly, you will too." Only now it says something else. "Return to the tower. We are not finished." I've tried to resist. I've tried to erase every trace of that place from my life. Maps, photos, journals. But even when I close my eyes, I see it. That impossible stone rising from the plains like a spike from the earth's heart. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they are. But I know they're not done with me. I've read the stories, the ones that get buried, the missing time, the cattle mutilations, the flickering lights, people vanishing off trails just feet from their campsites. All those strange symbols carved into the tower's base that geologists say are just natural erosion. All those local reports from native tribes that call it sacred or forbidden. I believe them now. They were trying to warn us. You don't camp near Devil's Tower, you don't stay after dark, and you sure as hell don't sleep inside a metal box with open windows and nowhere to run. Because if you do, something not of this world might notice you. And once it does, it never forgets. I'm telling you all this not for sympathy, not even for belief. I don't care if you believe me. I'm telling you so maybe someone else won't make the same mistake. The world isn't just what we can touch and measure. There are seams in it, tears, thin places, and Devil's Tower? That isn't just a mountain, it's a gate. One that doesn't swing open and shut. One that breathes. And once you stand near it long enough, once your blood brushes against the earth there, it remembers you. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. I don't know if I've already gone too far, but if I disappear tomorrow, if I walk barefoot into the woods with that blank look on my face, if I'm found miles from here in a burned circle of earth with no memory and eyes that don't blink, you'll know why. You'll know what found me. You'll know what waited. So if you're out there planning your big RV trip across the American wilderness, if you're drawing a red line across your maps, highlighting national parks, state forests, and all the places you've always dreamed of going, do yourself one favor. When you reach Wyoming, don't go near the tower, not even for a photo, not even to look, because once it sees you, you don't come back the same. And if you camp near it, you may not come back at all. It started with a silence that felt too intentional to be natural, like something in the trees had decided it didn't want to be heard. I've been Volkswagen camping for most of my adult life, in every corner of the United States, from the desert stretches of New Mexico to the pine-thick mountains of Washington. There's something honest about the road when you're riding in a VW bus. You feel every mile, every gust of wind through the paneling, and you don't just pass through a place, you let it shape you. My name's Darren. I'm 42, grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, but I've spent most of the last 15 years rolling from one campground to the next in old 76 Westphalia named Luma. There's a rhythm to it, a ritual. Wake early, coffee on the butane stove, check the oil, let the sun decide what direction you're headed. Most days, it's peace. Most nights, it's stillness. But there are places, isolated, sprawling places, where that stillness starts to feel like a trap. I'd spent that week meandering through Utah and Colorado, letting the summer bleed into early fall. No plans, just movement. And by the time I crossed into Wyoming, I figured it was time to see Grand Teton again. I remembered it as quiet. I remembered the open sky. And I remembered a ranger telling me once, years ago, "You listen closely at night out here. You'll hear more in what isn't there." It didn't mean much to me at the time. Now, I wonder if it was a warning. That afternoon, I pulled into a secluded camping spot about 15 miles from Jenny Lake. It was a first-come, first-served area, unmarked, deep in the Bridger-Teton forest, a place you only find if you've already been, or if you get real lucky, or unlucky. I was the only one there. No cell signal, no traffic hum in the distance, just wind teasing the aspens and the long hush of the Tetons above. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears reach for something, anything, to fill the space. The trees leaned close, the kind that seemed to be whispering to each other right as you turn your back. But I was used to isolation. I welcomed it. Or thought I did. I parked Luma just off the gravel, careful to wedge a flat rock under the back tire so we didn't roll if the frost set in. I opened the pop top, aired out the cushions, and went about my routine, boiling water for tea, pulling out my journal, sketching the trees. Normal things. Human things. The first moment I felt off came around dusk. I was sitting in my camp chair with a headlamp on, reading a Sand County almanac and sipping peppermint tea. The air was cold enough that every exhale made a little cloud. The trees around me were wrapped in mist like breath hovering too long. And then the silence deepened. Not the kind that eases into night. It was sudden, exact. Birds stopped chirping, insects froze, the wind stilled like someone had flipped a switch. That's when I heard it. A soft, dry crunch behind me, like a footstep but not heavy. A shifting weight, cautious. I turned quickly. Nothing. But the silence didn't lift. You learn not to jump at every little sound when you're camping alone. Wind plays tricks. So does your memory. So I went back to my book. I told myself maybe a deer was passing nearby. Maybe it caught my scent and moved on. But the sensation didn't go away, that feeling like something was just outside the light. I closed the book. Sat still. Waited. Another crunch, this one closer, directly behind the van. Now I stood. "Hello?" I called out. Just once, calm, controlled, no answer. But the sound stopped. I walked slowly around Luma, flashlight scanning the undergrowth. The beams bounced off tree trunks and thick clusters of grass. A few moths danced in the beam, but no eye shine. No animal, no sign of movement. Still, something felt off, like the forest was holding its breath. That night, I locked the van doors. I usually don't. Usually I leave one cracked open to let the air move through the space. But not this time. I closed the curtains, crawled into my sleeping bag, and turned off the lights. I don't know how long I laid there listening. Every creak of the van frame, every sway of a branch outside sent my mind looping. But eventually, I drifted off. It was the tapping that woke me. 3 soft knocks on the passenger window. Deliberate. Even. I froze, didn't sit up, didn't breathe. Again, 3 knocks. Same rhythm. The air inside the van was frigid. My breath came in short puffs. My hands trembled under the bag. And then a voice. Low, too low to belong to anyone I'd seen around the park. Open up. Not a question, a command. Open up. I stayed still, praying it would pass, that whoever or whatever was out there would decide I wasn't worth the trouble. The curtain covering the window didn't move. But I could sense something behind it. A presence, waiting, smiling. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, it was gone. No retreating footsteps, no crunch of underbrush. Just silence again, and then, slowly, the return of wind. the sound of an owl, a chorus of tiny insect wings resuming their ritual hum. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn broke, I opened the curtain, heart thudding. Nothing. No footprints, no marks in the dew-covered grass, no broken twigs, nothing to suggest anyone had ever stood there. But I knew what I'd heard, that voice, that tapping. It wasn't a dream. I packed up in record time, coffee forgotten, dishes unwashed. I drove out of the forest like it was chasing me. Didn't even look in the rear view until I was halfway back to the main highway. I made it to a gas station just outside Jackson Hole and sat there for an hour, staring at the mountains, trying to calm my hands enough to pour a cup of coffee. The clerk asked me if I was all right. I nodded. But I wasn't. I'd never felt fear like that before. Not during thunderstorms in the Mojave. Not when I'd gotten stuck in a washed-out canyon in New Mexico. Not even when I got a bad infection up in Oregon and had to limp my way to a ranger station with a fever. This was different. This was targeted. Whatever it was, it knew I was there, and it wanted me to know it. I left Grand Teton behind like a man outrunning a memory, but even miles down the road, something of that voice clung to me, like the aftertaste of metal on the back of your tongue. It wasn't just the words. It was the way it had spoken, controlled. Like it knew I wouldn't open the door, but wanted me to consider it anyway. And that consideration haunted me. I told myself it was stress. Too many nights alone in the woods, maybe. Not enough sleep. The logical part of me, it tried to take control, to patch over the cracks with reason. Maybe it had been a person, some lost hiker looking for help. Maybe they knocked, realized I was asleep, and wandered off before I answered. But that didn't explain the voice, or the silence that came before it, or the way every sound in that forest had vanished as if commanded. That week, I stuck to main roads, camped in state-run grounds, surrounded by other travelers, families, RVs with glow-in-the-dark stakes and barking dogs. It wasn't my usual pace, but I needed to feel human again. Then I got a text from my friend Lily. Lily and I go way back. We met on a trail crew in California when I was 28. She was all boots and dirt and sarcasm, the kind of person who'd hike 30 miles with a busted ankle just to avoid asking for help. We stayed in touch over the years, always sharing locations, trail updates, and weird stories from the road. Her message was short, just a pin on the map and 3 words: "You need to come." The pin dropped somewhere deep in Northern California, near Lassen Volcanic National Park. I hadn't been back to Lassen since 2012 after a wildfire closed off most of the park for weeks. My gut clenched when I saw the spot. It was remote, really remote. Not just off-grid, but off-memory. There weren't even campground listings out there. I called her, no answer, just her voicemail. I left a message, then another. Silence. I should have ignored it, should have trusted that part of me still buzzing from the voice in Wyoming, but I didn't. Because Lily doesn't scare easy. If she said you need to come, she meant it. So I turned Luma west and made my way down through Idaho, watching the terrain shift around me. The tall pines became tighter, the sky narrowed. There's a strange kind of gravity in that part of California. The roads don't just take you somewhere, they pull. 3 days later, I rolled down a dirt service road marked only by a broken wooden sign. No writing left on it, just a faded Forest Service emblem and a rusted nail barely holding the top in place. The road was hell. Washed out in sections, potholes big enough to rattle your teeth loose. It wasn't meant for a VW. But I kept going, and eventually it opened up into a clearing. That's when I saw her van, an old Sprinter with the left taillight duct taped and her signature sticker on the rear window, wander slow, leave quiet. But the van was dark, no one inside. I parked next to her and stepped out. The air smelled strange, like pine needles, sure, but also something else underneath. Metallic, damp, like wet copper coins. "Lily?" I called. No answer. I walked around her van. The driver's side door was unlocked. That wasn't like her. She always locked it. Always. I opened it slowly, expecting to find her napping in the back or reading a book. But it was empty, neatly organized as usual. Backpack stowed, food packed away, solar lantern clipped on the ceiling hook, except her boots were missing. She never left camp without them. Now my pulse was rising. I took out my phone, still no signal, not even one bar. I stood in the clearing, scanning the tree line. The forest here was dense, not just thick with trees, but layered ferns, moss so tall it pressed against your hips. No trail in sight. I cupped my hands and shouted her name. Nothing. And then, something moved. Just beyond the edge of the clearing. Not a person. A shadow. Tall. Narrow. It didn't walk. It leaned. I blinked, and it was gone. I backed toward my van, fumbling for the keys in my pocket, but something stopped me. A sound. It was faint at first, like wind through tight branches, but it wasn't wind. It had rhythm. Whispering. Low, too low to understand, like it was coming from underground. But I felt it, not in my ears, in my chest. Darren, a whisper. My name, from the forest. I froze. My feet sunk an inch into the soil, the air pressed down like a weight. Darren. Louder this time. Closer. My eyes darted to the forest's edge. Nothing. I backed toward Luma, heart hammering. Then I saw something nailed to a tree. It was small, maybe 5 inches across. Bleached gray wood, circular, looked like an old tag or medallion, but it had something carved into it. A spiral. Interlocked loops. The symbol hit me like a gut punch, because I'd seen it before. Years ago in Colorado, burned into a dead tree outside a campsite where a woman had vanished without a trace. Locals had called it the signal. Just a superstition, they said. Something to keep kids from wandering too far, but it always stuck with me. And now here it was again. I turned and sprinted back to Luma, slammed the door, locked it, started the engine, and just as I threw it into reverse, something ran past the passenger window. I only saw it for a flash, a blur of pale limbs and something like hair dragging across its back, but it moved fast, too fast, and low, like it crawled on all fours but didn't belong to any animal I'd ever seen. I backed out fast, tires slipping on the soft dirt. My bumper clipped a log and the van lurched, but I didn't stop, didn't care. I just drove. Down the service road, back toward the last paved highway. I didn't look in the mirrors, not once. I couldn't. My whole body was locked tight with something deeper than fear, something closer to knowledge. That thing, whatever it was, it had been waiting. And Lily, I still don't know what happened to her. The next morning, I called the local rangers, told them I found an abandoned van. They asked for the location, I gave it. They said they'd send someone. A week later, I called again. They said they never found it. They said there were no roads where I described, but I was there. I saw her van, I saw that symbol, and I heard my name in the trees. I should have gone home after that. Parked the van in a friend's driveway in Tucson, let the dust settle, pretended none of it happened. But that's not what I did. Because something had shifted in me after Lassen. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was recognition, a pattern, a shape starting to form behind all the weirdness I'd been trying to write off for years. And if I'm being honest, I think part of me needed to know it wasn't just in my head. I needed proof of Lily, of what I saw, of what I felt whispering through the trees. So I did what I always do when the road no longer feels random. I followed instinct. It led me to Arkansas. Now, if you'd asked me 2 years ago what I thought about the Ozarks, I'd have told you it was one of the most beautiful, peaceful regions in the South. Thick forests, gentle streams. Rolling hills that seem to fold into each other like a prayer. But peace has layers, and some of those layers are hiding things. I'd heard whispers over the years from other van lifers, rumors of lost campgrounds out in the Ozark National Forest, places that don't show up on maps, with roads that disappear behind you once you drive them. Most people laughed it off as local myth, the kind of tale that gets passed around a campfire after one too many beers. But one name kept surfacing again and again. Beaver Hollow. There was no GPS coordinate, no real directions, just stories. A hidden site, abandoned sometime in the 80s after a rash of disappearances. According to one online thread, a ranger posted anonymously that people who go looking for Beaver Hollow sometimes find it, but they don't always come back. Or if they do, they aren't the same, which naturally made me want to find it even more. I spent 2 days in the Ozarks asking locals. Most people just shook their heads, some smiled and walked away. But one man, older, white beard, deep southern drawl, told me the way. "You ain't gonna see a sign," he said, leaning over my van's window like we were conspirators. "You'll feel it before you find it. Keep an eye out for a hickory tree with a split trunk. Looks like a wishbone. About a mile past that, take the gravel road that don't look like a road." Cryptic, but clear enough. The next day, I followed his directions through winding forest roads, the kind that disappear into green tunnels where sunlight filters like church light through stained leaves. I found the wishbone tree. It looked like it had been struck by lightning and left standing, split straight up the center. And just beyond that, I found the road that don't look like a road. It was more like two deep ruts through high grass. Luma bounced and growled as I eased her down it, the forest growing tighter with each bend. Eventually, it opened up to a clearing. At first glance, there was nothing sinister about it. Just a few weather-beaten picnic tables, a crumbling fire ring, and the remains of an old outhouse leaning at a bad angle. A wooden sign lay in pieces near a pile of moss-covered rocks. One of the boards still had the faint trace of a letter, maybe a B. This had to be it. Beaver Hollow. I parked the van and stepped out. The air was heavy, still. Not quiet like Grand Teton had been, no sudden vanishing of sound, but thick, like breathing through wool. The birds still sang, but off-key, off-rhythm. Their calls didn't match the time of day, and it smelled strange, like old stone and water that hadn't moved in years. I walked the perimeter, boots crunching over damp leaves and patches of lichen. There were no fresh tire tracks, no footprints. Nothing to suggest anyone had camped there in years. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not from a distance, from beneath. It felt like the earth itself had eyes. I stayed close to the van that evening, cooking on the portable stove and scribbling in my journal. I didn't plan to spend the night. I told myself I'd just scout it, maybe shoot a few photos and leave before dusk. But then I found the cabin. It was behind a wall of brambles, so overgrown I wouldn't have noticed it if the light hadn't caught on a fragment of broken window. Small. One room, maybe two. The kind of structure you'd mistake for a shed if you weren't looking closely. The door was barely hanging on. I pushed it open. Inside, it smelled like rot and dust. A single cot frame lay collapsed in the corner. Rusted tools hung on the wall, and scrawled across the far panel, etched in jagged lines, were 3 words: "The ground breathes." I stepped back, felt the floorboards shift under me, not from weight, from pulse, like something alive was waiting beneath it. That's when the temperature dropped. Fast. The kind of drop that makes your ears ring and your breath come out in clouds. But the sun was still up. The light was golden, warm on the trees, yet the cold in that cabin was bitter, almost angry. I didn't stay. I bolted out, stumbled through the brambles, and nearly tripped getting back to the clearing. And that's when I saw them. 3 figures, standing just at the tree line, silent, still, not moving, not watching, just existing in the space between woods and world. I couldn't make out their faces. They weren't close enough, but they stood too straight, too symmetrical, like cutouts. I shouted, no answer. I grabbed my camera and took a photo, but the second I lowered it, they were gone. I checked the picture, just trees. But I know what I saw. I didn't even bother with the stove. I got in Luma, turned the engine, and threw it in reverse, tearing back down that overgrown path, heart slamming against my ribs like a fist in a box. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Didn't breathe easy until I saw another car. And when I looked back at the GPS, that road, it was gone. Not just off the map, off the satellite, like it had never existed. But the photos were still on my camera. And even though the figures weren't there, when I zoomed in on the tree line, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Carvings, etched into the bark of every tree in a wide semicircle surrounding the campground. The same spiral I'd seen in California. And beneath one of the spirals, barely visible in the low resolution, he waits beneath. I didn't camp for weeks after that. Stayed in motels, gas station parking lots, even a friend's barn outside Asheville. Somewhere in me, the rhythm had broken. And if you've ever lived on the road long enough, you know what that means. Your compass stops spinning, your instincts freeze, your van feels like a coffin with wheels, the trees stop being shelter. They become walls. But I couldn't stop thinking about those carvings, the spiral, the phrase, he waits beneath. And more than anything, that cold in the cabin, the kind that doesn't just touch your skin, it moves through you, turns the air inside your lungs into something foreign. The thing about the fear I felt out there was that it didn't fade with distance. That's how you know it's real. It stays with you, sleeps light, wakes early, sits beside you in silence while the world pretends nothing ever happened. And yet, I kept going, not out of bravery, out of something closer to obsession. I started tracking it, that spiral symbol, online, in forums, in ranger message boards, in graffiti carved into the backs of picnic tables in forgotten parts of national forests. It showed up more often than I expected, sometimes scratched into bark, sometimes etched into stone, always in out-of-the-way places. Always near reports of strange disappearances. Always near witness accounts that started the same way. I thought I heard someone whisper my name. One location came up again and again. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, specifically a stretch near the Deep Creek area. A place known for trails, waterfalls, the kind of tourist hikes that get listed on family travel blogs. But just off those paths, buried behind rhododendron thickets and game trails, that's where the real stories came from. Rangers who saw figures moving between trees at twilight, campers who reported waking to see people standing around their tents, not moving, not speaking, families that hiked in together and never came out. And in every version of the tale, there was one consistent detail, a soft knocking, like something tapping the trees. I didn't want to go, but I had to, because the deeper I looked into this thing, this symbol, this presence, the more I started to realize it wasn't isolated. It wasn't just Wyoming or California or Arkansas. It was connected. A thread stretching beneath the surface of this country, running quiet through its oldest, wildest places. And the Smokies, they were its heart. I arrived just before dusk on a Tuesday. The campgrounds were half full, families roasting hot dogs, a few retirees with satellite dishes attached to their rigs, a couple of Appalachian trail hikers refueling before heading north. I picked a spot near the creek, close enough to feel part of the world, but far enough to keep eyes off my van. I didn't want attention. That first night passed quietly. No knocks, no whispers, just the rushing of the water and the occasional hoot of an owl. I almost let myself believe it would stay that way. The second night, things changed. It started around 2 a.m. I woke suddenly. No sound, no movement, just a feeling, like someone had cracked the air open around me. I sat up in the van, listened, nothing but water, and then one knock, soft, on the back hatch, just one. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat, the kind of stillness where your body turns to stone, hoping to vanish. Then another knock, higher up this time, like it had shifted, like it was searching for the right spot. I reached for my flashlight, didn't turn it on yet. Then the knocks changed, not harder, but quicker, a rhythm, like code. Tap, 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 tap. And then, as quickly as they'd come, they stopped. Silence pressed in from every side. And through the quiet, a whisper as soft as breath through fabric. Let us in. Not me. Us. I turned the flashlight on and flicked open the curtains. Nothing. No footprints. No movement. But there was something on the glass. A handprint. Small. Delicate. But wrong. The fingers were too long. The palm too narrow. Like a child's hand drawn by someone who'd never seen one before. I left the site at dawn. Drove deeper into the park until the tourists thinned out, until the road narrowed and the forest swallowed up the signs. I found a spot near an old unmaintained trail, no name, no markers, just a worn groove in the underbrush. I hiked it. Something was pulling me now. Not fear, not logic, curiosity soaked in dread. The trail was barely there, roots twisted up like ribs from the dirt. Trees leaned close, branches arching overhead like cathedral beams. I hiked for over an hour. No sounds but my own steps and the occasional rustle of leaves. And then I heard it, the knocking, but not on wood this time, on stone. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. I froze, turned, nothing, but the sound came again, this time from the left. Surrounding me, I stepped forward, and that's when I saw the structure, half buried in the brush, choked in vines, a circular pit of stone back no wider than 10 feet, maybe a well, maybe something older. I approached it slowly, the knocking stopped. I looked over the edge. It wasn't a well. It was a shaft, deep, too dark to see the bottom, but it breathed. Air moved up from it, not with the wind, but with rhythm, like lungs exhaling, and carved into the stones around the rim again and again like a chant, "He waits beneath." My stomach turned. I stepped back, heart pounding, legs barely working, and then, from inside the shaft, something climbed. Not fast, not loud, but rising. I didn't wait to see it. I ran, crashing through the forest, slicing my arms on brambles, nearly tripping over roots, too terrified to look back. I reached the van and slammed the door shut, engine roaring to life. And as I peeled away, I glanced once in the mirror. There was a figure at the trailhead, not chasing me, just watching, tall, still, and smiling. I didn't talk to anyone for almost a month after that. No texts, no social media. I pulled into a small, out-of-the-way RV park just south of Santa Fe and told the owners I needed a place to disappear for a while. Paid them cash, didn't tell them my name, they didn't ask. I parked Luma in the furthest corner of the property, shaded under cottonwoods where the Wi-Fi barely reached and the cell service didn't matter. I spent my days fixing little things on the van, sanding rust, checking brake lines, cleaning windows that wouldn't stay clean. I'd wipe the inside of the glass only to find faint smudges the next morning, like something had pressed against them while I slept. I told myself it was condensation, dirt, my own fingerprints, probably. I told myself a lot of things, but at night, I still dreamed of that shaft, the knocking, the rhythm, that phrase repeating in my head like a song I didn't ask to learn. He waits beneath, and always the same moment, just before I wake, I see Lily, standing by the tree line in Lawson, her face not afraid, not lost, just blank, like she's listening to something only she can hear, like she belongs to it now. I don't know if it's a memory or a warning. I told myself I wouldn't chase this anymore. I told myself the last place broke me, that my mind was playing tricks, that if I stopped feeding the fear, it would starve. But then I got the package. No return address, no stamp, just a small padded envelope left on my front windshield one morning. No footprints, no tire tracks. Inside was a cassette tape and a note, scrawled in thin, shaky handwriting. You've heard them too. No explanation, no name, just that one sentence, just that one object. I hadn't touched a cassette in years. Had to dig my old recorder out of a crate under the bed frame in Luma. It still worked, barely. I slid the tape in, hit play, and leaned close. At first, static. Then wind. Then a voice. Faint. Tired. Male. It sounded like it was recorded in a tent or cabin. I could hear the occasional creak of wood, like someone shifting in an old chair. I don't know how long I've been out here, the voice said, but I'm not alone. Not anymore. They move between the trees. But they don't live in the trees. They live under them. That's what people don't understand. They're not watching from the woods. They're listening through the soil. More static. Then a gasp. A long, shaking inhale. I made a mistake. I marked the spiral near my fire pit, thought it would keep them away, but it only called them closer. I think it's a beacon, a signal they recognize. I think it opens something. I've been hearing tapping all night, on the rocks, on my tent poles. They're trying to talk. Then silence, not static, silence. And then the tape cut off. I listened to it 4 more times, trying to pick out a location, an accent, any clue. But the quality was poor. The message, even worse. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a confession. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed up and left Santa Fe. I wasn't running anymore. Not exactly. It felt more like being pulled again. There was one more place I had to go. The place where all of this started for me, before the voice in Wyoming, before Lily vanished, before I knew the spiral even existed. Shenandoah. I was 26 the first time I camped there. Long before I lived full-time in my van. Just me in a borrowed tent and a girl named Morgan who I thought I loved. It was supposed to be romantic, isolated just in the woods. But the trip was a disaster. We argued, got rained on, lost the tent poles, barely made it a night. Still, something about that place stuck with me. I remembered waking up once, just for a moment, and hearing voices outside the tent. Not talking, chanting, in a slow, low, almost melodic tone. But Morgan hadn't heard it. She'd laughed it off, said I probably dreamed it. I let it go. But now, looking back, what if that was the first moment something saw me? What if it's been following ever since? I drove east for days, through flatlands, forests, up into the rolling ridges of Virginia. The Appalachian Mountains feel different than the rest of the country. Older, quieter, but not peaceful. The quiet here is observant, like 100,000 eyes hidden behind bark. I arrived just after dark and parked at an overlook near a closed-off trailhead. This part of the park had been shut down since spring after a mudslide damaged some of the access roads, but I knew how to get in. I followed the old trail, flashlight low, breath steady. The trees swallowed the beam like smoke, but I wasn't looking with my eyes. I was feeling, and then I felt it. That shift in the air, that weight pressing down from above and below. The forest started to hum, not with sound, but with intention, a pressure on the skin. I turned left, stepped off the trail, and walked until I found the clearing. It was smaller than I remembered, and overgrown, but it was the same. And there, etched into the boulder at the far end, was the spiral, faded, chipped, but unmistakable. I reached out and touched it, and the forest exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. Like a breath had been held for too long and finally released. The wind surged through the trees, leaves trembled, the dirt under my boots shifted, and then the ground knocked. Once. From underneath, I fell back, heart screaming, flashlight flying from my grip, and then I heard it. The voice. Not like before. Not a whisper. Not a threat. It was me. My voice. Repeating the same words over and over. He waits beneath. He waits beneath. Coming from the soil, the rocks, the air. It didn't stop. Just looped. I scrambled to my feet and ran blind. Cut through brambles, ripped my jacket. Didn't stop until I saw the outline of Luma waiting at the overlook. And as I reached the driver's door, I turned back one last time and saw the spiral, freshly carved into the pavement, still bleeding. When I woke the next morning in the van, the spiral was gone. No scratch in the pavement, no dark lines, nothing but damp asphalt and scattered leaves. I stared at that empty spot for a long time, long enough for the sun to rise fully over the ridge and cast gold light across the overlook. Part of me wanted to believe I'd imagined it, that my mind, cracked by too many lonely miles and strange encounters, had painted that image in the dark, but I knew better. I still felt it, that hum under my skin, like my bones remembered something my brain didn't want to. That morning, I opened my journal. Not the public one I post from, the private one, the one nobody's seen but me. And I started flipping back, through old sketches, campsite coordinates, strange dreams, animal sightings, weather patterns, missing persons cases I'd scribbled down out of curiosity. Something was forming in the margins, not a story, a map. Every place I'd had an encounter, every national park, every abandoned trail, every cabin, every knock, every spiral, they didn't just scatter randomly across the country. They curved, like a crescent, like the upper arch of a circle not yet closed. A pattern. And in the center of that arc, like a pupil in a staring eye, sat one place. Crater Lake. I hadn't even thought about Oregon until that moment. Never camped there. Never even passed through. But now it pulled at me, like the final dot on a line I didn't realize I'd been drawing. I drove north, straight through West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Nebraska. I barely stopped to eat, slept with the engine off at highway rest stops. My dreams were worse now. Not of the woods, not of figures, but of soil opening up, revealing impossible things writhing just below the earth. In one dream, I saw Lily again. She was underground, her mouth sewn shut, spiral carved into her forehead. She wasn't scared, she wasn't trying to escape. By the time I reached Oregon, I felt hollow, like something had carved me out and filled the empty space with fog. But I knew what I had to do. Crater Lake is beautiful in the way that cliffs are beautiful, dangerous, deep, unnaturally still. Formed from the collapse of Mount Mazama thousands of years ago, it doesn't flow or feed rivers, it just holds, like a secret. I arrived just after a light rain. The air was clean, too clean, like the sky had scrubbed the earth of scent. Everything smelled erased. The main campsites were closed for the season, but I wasn't looking for those. I followed an old fire road on foot away from the lake rim into thicker forest. The trees here are old, some of the oldest in the country. They rise like stone columns, bark blackened with age, limbs that creak without wind. And there, about 2 miles in, I found the site, not marked, not even really a clearing, just a soft dip in the land where the trees formed a nearly perfect circle around a patch of bare earth. No grass, no moss, just soil. I dropped my pack and stood there for a long time. Waiting, I don't know what for. The sun dipped, the shadows stretched, and then the knocking started. But this time it wasn't on trees. It came from inside me. At first I thought it was my heartbeat, but no, the rhythm was off, slower, measured, like a drum under my ribs. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I fell to my knees, felt the cold rise through the ground, not like temperature, like a presence. And then I heard it. Voices. Dozens, hundreds, layered, male, female, children, old, all speaking at once but whispering the same words. Beneath. Beneath. My hands were trembling, my vision blurred, my breath caught somewhere between panic and revelation. Because I understood something in that moment. It had never been about chasing fear. Not really. It had been about waking something up. And I had. With every campsite, every spiral, every time I told someone what I'd seen. I hadn't been warning anyone. I'd been spreading it like a seed. That's when I saw the shape forming in the soil before me. Slowly, like something invisible was pressing upward from below. A perfect spiral, the exact same one, but this time it moved. The lines began to rotate slowly, dragging flecks of soil in a tightening loop. A small wind whipped up, circling inward. The ground began to hum, and from deep below a sound rose, not a voice, a growl. Low, ancient, like the earth itself was clearing its throat. I backed away, too late. The center of the spiral cracked open, and something began to emerge. A shape, tall, narrow, shifting like smoke trapped in bone. No face, no eyes, just the vague suggestion of arms too long and limbs that bent wrong. It hovered, it breathed, and when it moved, the trees flinched. Then it spoke, not aloud. Inside, you've brought them. I shook my head, tears streaking my face. I didn't mean to. It leaned closer. You called? They answered. You showed them where. Then it was gone. Just like that. No noise, no flash. The spiral closed in on itself, the forest stilled, the air returned. I collapsed. I don't remember how I got back to the van, just that when I opened my eyes again, it was morning. I was curled up in the back seat, muddy, shaking. My boots were gone. My wrists were marked with faint spiral bruises, already fading. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was headed. Somewhere quiet, somewhere far. But that's when the real horror set in, because I started seeing the spiral everywhere on rest stop walls. In the condensation on my windshield, drawn in crayon on the back window of a parked RV, everywhere. And I'm not the only one anymore. I've started getting emails from strangers, voice messages, handwritten letters sent to post office boxes I haven't used in years. People describing the same knocking, the same whispers, the same impossible structures in the woods. It's spreading. It was never one place. It was a network, an underground system of old, forgotten things. Listening, waiting, growing with every story shared, every campfire tale retold, and we've been feeding it. With every fear, every night spent alone in a tent when you swear you heard your own, every van parked a little too far off the trail where something brushes the door just after midnight, every carved spiral you never asked about. This isn't just a warning. This is a confession. And I'm sorry. I don't tell this story on the road anymore. Not around campfires, not over beers with fellow travelers, not even in whispers with people I trust. Because the moment you say it aloud, really say it, it becomes something more. It roots itself into the earth beneath you. It stretches out like fingers through the ground, searching for someone else to listen, to believe, to let it in. And if I've learned anything from all these miles, all these places, it's this. Some stories don't want to be told. They want to be felt, carried, lived, and they will find you when they're ready. After Crater Lake, I stopped moving for a while. Park Lumen, a desert outside Sedona, dry soil, no trees, no shadows. I thought maybe I could outrun it if I just stayed in the open long enough. If I stopped feeding it, if I kept quiet. But silence doesn't stop it. It thrives in silence. The knocks came again, soft, casual, like fingers brushing the outside of the van. Always at night, always just before I drifted off. And now the dreams weren't just mine. Others started messaging me, photos, audio files, GPS pins, from Shenandoah, from Big Bend, from the Olympic Peninsula, all the places I'd passed through, all the places I thought I was alone. One woman sent me a voice note. She said she'd heard knocking on her teardrop trailer while parked in Glacier National Park. Said when she opened the door, no one was there. But the trees looked different, taller, as if they'd moved closer. She'd seen the spiral too, drawn in frost on her trailer window. Another man claimed he'd been camping near Zion and woke up to find a small stone in the center of his tent. Smooth, polished, with a spiral carved so deeply into it that he swore it couldn't have been made by human hands. He kept it for a while, said it hummed at night, said it whispered. Then one day, he disappeared. Left his trailer behind, food still warm on the stove, no note, just a new spiral carved into the floor of his camper, burned into the linoleum like a brand. No one's found him since. I think the scariest part of all this isn't the creatures, or the symbols, or the dreams. It's how normal it all begins. It's how the forest can welcome you, how the road can feel like home, how the stillness of nature can feel like a balm, until you realize it's not still at all. It's listening, and it's always been listening. I started noticing other things too. Patterns in the national park disappearances, clusters, cycles. You can trace them like you trace wildfires, each flare-up followed by a lull, then another burst years later, always in places with deep, unmapped cave systems, always near old native burial sites, always in forests that locals swear are different somehow. No one talks about the earth anymore, not the way we used to. We've forgotten that the land isn't just ground beneath our feet. It's alive, it remembers. And maybe, just maybe, some places were never meant for us to tread. Maybe the wilderness is still wild in ways we'll never understand. I think about Lily all the time. Sometimes I still get a text from her number. Never words, just a spiral emoji. Once I got a photo, just trees, dark, still, but in the background, barely visible, was the outline of a van. Her van. Part of me wants to believe she's alive, that she chose to stay out there, that she became something else, not lost, but changed. Another part of me knows the truth. She didn't get taken, she got invited, and she said yes. That's the real danger, I think. It's not the knocking, not the whispers, not even the shadows in the trees. It's the invitation, the feeling that you belong out there, that whatever watches from beneath knows you better than you know yourself. Because once you start listening, really listening, you'll want to answer. And once you answer, it never lets go. So what do I do now? I keep moving, not because I'm running, but because staying still means letting it catch up. I think it's like a signal somewhere between myth and memory. Maybe even older than language. Something deep in the bones of the earth that's been trying to return. And maybe we've just made it easier. With our vans, our maps, our obsession with solitude and self-discovery in the most ancient places we can find. We've been sending out beacons without knowing it, lighting fires we don't know how to put out, marking ourselves, and I was one of the first to connect the dots. I don't know what that makes me, but I know what I've become. A carrier. A story passed through trees, a warning whispered in dirt. I'm telling you this not because I think you'll believe me. I'm telling you because someday, if you find yourself parked alone in some remote patch of national forest with the windows fogged up and the fire long since dead, and you hear something knocking from the shadows, don't open the door. Don't speak. And whatever you do, don't draw the spiral. Because once you do, it's already too late. It knows you, and it's already waiting. It started with a sound I couldn't name, something low, dragging, like thick brush being pulled across stone, not loud enough to panic me, not at first, just enough to make me glance up from my journal, out the rain-specked window of the RV, into the dense Georgia woods that pressed against the campsite like a closed fist. I remember the heat. Not the kind of heat you sweat through in the summer, this was spring, early March, but the kind that felt misplaced, heavy, like something smoldering underground. It radiated from the pine-blanketed hills behind the campground, seeped through the floor of the RV like a fever. My wife, Camille, had already kicked off her shoes and lay sprawled on the couch with a book, sweat darkening the neckline of her t-shirt. We were parked at a secluded site near the Cohuta Wilderness, not far from a mostly forgotten trail called the Panther Creek Spur. You'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. Just a narrow gravel cut barely wider than our VW Westphalia, with a crooked Forest Service sign half swallowed by kudzu. I'd read about the area on a niche camping forum. Someone described it as untouched, private, sacred, which should have raised every red flag. But we were sick of crowded RV parks and manufactured wilderness experiences. I wanted real quiet, real wild. We got it. There was no cell service past LJ. That first night, after the dragging sound, after dinner, after the firewood popped like bone under the flames, Camille said, "It feels like we shouldn't be here." She said it quietly, eyes fixed on the tree line. "You mean like trespassing?" I asked. "No," she said, "like the woods don't want us here." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I wanted it to be. The kind of laugh that tries to cancel out the silence. We'd been through a rough few months. Camille had left her job after a toxic burnout, and I'd lost my father in December. Grief hung between us like a third presence. I'd thought camping would help. I thought the stillness might crack something open, release whatever tension was coiled in us. Instead, it felt like the forest just absorbed it, reflected it back. That night, I dreamt I was walking barefoot through the trees, unable to see my own hands. The forest felt too large, too tall. I wasn't sure if I was shrinking or if the pines were still growing, stretching skyward with impossible speed. I woke up sweating, stomach tight, heart hammering like I'd been running. It was 3:12 a.m. I lay still and listened. The dragging was back, but this time it was closer, not constant, just intermittent, something moving across the forest floor. Dry leaves disturbed, a pause, then another low scrape like something heavy pulling itself forward. I leaned up on my elbow and stared at the window. The glass was black. Just black. A mirror. I didn't want to see my reflection. A few minutes passed, then a whisper, too faint to make out. I couldn't tell if it was Camille talking in her sleep or something outside. I pressed my ear against the cool metal of the van wall. Nothing. Just the buzz of insects and distant rhythmic chirping from deep in the trees. It could have been frogs or something else mimicking frogs. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Camille looked at me and said, "You heard it too, didn't you?" We didn't talk about it more than that. We just made breakfast and packed for a hike, but everything felt tight, wrong angles in the landscape. The trailhead map had been vandalized, scratched deep with what looked like fingernails. The forest didn't feel still. It felt like it was watching, like we were the event, not the observers. A mile into the hike, we found something I still can't explain. A circle of rocks, neat, deliberate. Maybe 30 feet wide. In the center, an old RV door, rusted and twisted, laid flat on the ground like a trapdoor. There was no sign of a frame, no remnants of a vehicle, just the door. Clean metal against moss. Camille froze. "This wasn't here before," she whispered. She was right. We'd hiked this trail 3 years ago before everything got hard. We took the same turnoffs, the same photos by the same fallen tree. I remembered this spot. It had been empty. I knelt and touched the door. It was cold. Too cold for the air around us. Beneath my palm, I felt vibration. Not strong, but there. "Don't," Camille said sharply, pulling me back. We walked fast after that. The forest felt tighter. The trail turned unfamiliar. Twice, we passed the same stump with the same curved branch shaped like a hook. Camille stopped, breathing hard, and said, "We're not going in circles." But we were. I knew we were. I could feel it in my gut. The air smelled wrong, wet, metallic, like pennies in standing water. The wind picked up, but only at ankle height, like something crawling past, brushing our legs. Camille whispered, "Something's following us." We didn't run. Not then, just picked up our pace until the trees parted and the clearing appeared again like a dream lifting. Our van sat untouched, exactly where we left it. For a second, I almost convinced myself we'd imagined the whole thing, that it was stress, memory, grief, playing tricks. But when we climbed inside, the side window was cracked open, just a sliver. We never leave the windows cracked when we hike. We're careful campers, obsessively so. That night, I made sure every door was locked, every latch secured. I kept a fire going as long as I could, but around midnight, it died low and I felt the air shift again. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in under 10 minutes. My breath fogged the glass. The dragging started again, but this time it wasn't outside, it was on the roof. A slow scrape, like nails on aluminum. Camille was sitting up already, eyes wide, face pale. "Don't move," she mouthed. We stayed like that for almost an hour, afraid to turn on lights, afraid to speak. The scraping never got louder, just circled slowly, a deliberate perimeter on the roof. We heard breathing, not heavy, not animal-like, more like shallow panting, controlled, human. Then, nothing, a thump and silence. I didn't sleep. I kept the axe from our firewood stash in my lap and stared at the door until morning light broke through the trees like a reprieve. When we stepped outside, we found footprints on the roof. Human, bare, and too long. The prints weren't right. I kept staring at them, hoping the sun would flatten them out, make them look normal in daylight. But no, there were only 3 toes on each foot. Long, wide set. The arch was too high, the heel almost non-existent. I checked again. Camille counted 5 sets of prints, each circling the roof before ending at the rear where the ladder was. Except, we never used that ladder. It was rusted solid, hadn't moved in years. It should have groaned if someone climbed it. We should have heard it. We packed fast. The plan had been to stay another night, maybe 2, but we weren't talking plans anymore. Camille kept looking into the woods like she expected something to lunge out. I started the van and didn't bother with breakfast. Just wanted the road. But when we got to the main trailhead, the gravel path we'd driven in on, it wasn't there. Gone. I slammed the brakes, turned around, backed up slowly. "Is this the right bend?" Camille asked. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said. "The GPS said it was only one way in. This is it." But now the trees were different. Thicker. Wrong. Pine needles that hung heavy, almost wet, blotting out most of the morning light. We drove another 100 yards, and it was like the forest swallowed the van whole. The air changed again, cooler but somehow thicker, like breathing through soaked wool. I put it in park. Camille leaned forward. There was a clearing. "Remember the wooden sign with the trail map? The Forest Service one?" I nodded. "Yeah." We got out and walked 50 feet up the road. Nothing. No sign. Just trees. I pulled out my compass, the one I kept clipped to my keychain. North had always been reliable. Now the needle spun. Slowly, then violently. Then stopped, pointing south. But we were facing south. I checked again. Shook it. Waited. Still south. "We're turned around," I muttered. "No," Camille whispered, and her voice cracked. "It's turned us around." We spent the next few hours trying every direction. The van made wide, looping arcs across unfamiliar dirt roads that shouldn't have existed. Sometimes they'd split, curl into each other, then vanish behind us. Once, I swore we passed the same burned log 3 times, even though I'd marked it with a scratched X using my tire iron. By 2 p.m., we were back at the same campsite. Same fire pit, same low circle of blackened stones, same smell of wet, scorched wood. We hadn't driven in circles. We'd driven outward for hours, and somehow ended up back where we started. Camille sat on the van's step and held her head in her hands. "There's something in the land," she said. "Something beneath it." That night, I found her outside at 3 a.m., barefoot, standing 10 feet from the van in her sleep clothes, eyes open but unfocused. Her lips moved, whispering something I couldn't hear. I touched her shoulder and she jolted like I'd electrocuted her. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered. She blinked. "I heard them." "Heard who?" "The trees. They're calling." I pulled her inside. Locked everything. She didn't argue. She slept in the passenger seat, curled up like a child. I sat beside her, awake, staring through the windshield into the dense black that the headlights couldn't penetrate. A storm rolled in just before dawn, thunder that echoed low and constant, like something pacing just beyond the ridge. The rain didn't come down in drops. It came in sheets, sideways. Branches swayed, trees groaned, but the sound that cut through everything was that dragging. Again, not across the roof this time, not the floor, it was under us. Beneath the van, the scrape of something huge, deliberate, shifting in the soil like it was inside the earth. Something burrowing, repositioning. I felt it through the tires, and then something pressed upward beneath the floor. One long, slow push. The metal flexed, groaned, then released. Camille started screaming in her sleep. I grabbed her, shook her awake. She gasped and cried out like she'd been drowning. "I saw the door again," she whispered. "The one in the woods. It was open this time. Something came out." The next morning, if you could call it that, because the sky never cleared and light barely broke through, I made a decision. We couldn't drive out. The forest wouldn't let us. But maybe, on foot, we could push through far enough to reach another site, another camper, a ranger station, anything human. I packed food, water, marked the van with bright red fabric tied to the door handles, and left a flare in the sink. Camille didn't want to go. She wanted to stay in the van. She said she felt safer there, but I knew she was unraveling. I had to get her out. We left just before noon. I kept the compass in my palm, and it stayed steady for the first hour. North. Finally. The forest was quieter than it had ever been. No birds, no insects, just the crunch of our boots and the wind brushing against leaves that never rustled quite right. Eventually, we came to the same clearing with the metal door. Only now it was open. Hinged upward, dirt pushed aside like something had forced its way out from below. The inside was pitch black, too black, like it drank light. Camille started crying silently. Not sobbing, just tears streaming down her face, her jaw clenched, eyes locked on the dark rectangle in the center of the woods. "I saw it," she said, "in my dreams. It was wearing his face." "Whose?" She didn't answer. A rustle behind us. I turned, raised the flare gun. My hands were shaking. I saw only trees, still and narrow, bark too smooth. Then a voice. Daniel, my name, spoken clearly, softly, not Camille's voice, my father's. He'd been dead 4 months. I turned to Camille. Her lips were moving again. She was whispering to the trees. "Camille," I hissed. "Snap out of it." She didn't blink, just stepped forward toward the open door in the clearing. I grabbed her arm and pulled hard. She resisted, harder than she should have been able to, like something else was moving her body. Her eyes rolled back for a second and I saw only the whites. She shivered, then blinked, then gasped and fell to her knees like she'd come up for air. "I couldn't stop," she said. "It's inside, watching us, using our memories." I looked at the door. Something had moved, I was sure of it. Just a flicker in the black, too low, too fast to make out. But it saw me, and I felt it recognize me. I dragged Camille to her feet and ran. Branches slapped our faces, mud pulled at our boots. But the forest didn't try to stop us this time. It wanted us to run. We didn't know how far we ran. Time didn't pass the way it should. There was no sun to measure it by, just a dim, washed-out gray bleeding through the canopy, never shifting. It felt like afternoon for hours. Eventually, Camille stumbled and went down hard on a slick patch of moss, twisting her ankle. She didn't scream, didn't even react. She just lay there, shivering. I bent down beside her, my breath fogging in the sudden cold. "Can you stand?" She shook her head once, eyes glassy. "It touched me," she whispered. "Back there in the clearing, when you weren't looking." My mouth went dry. "What touched you?" She didn't answer. Just reached into her shirt and pulled out her necklace, a simple silver chain with a small gold locket. It had been her grandmother's. She unclasped it and showed me the inside. Empty. It used to hold a picture of us, one from the Grand Canyon trip, smiling and sunburned before all the grief, but now it was just an oval void. Smooth, like nothing had ever been there. "I didn't take it out," she whispered. "It's been in there for years." I helped her up. We had to keep moving. Had to believe the edge of this place existed. The forest around us grew stranger. No animal sounds, no birds, no insects, not even distant echoes. The trees looked wrong, taller than before, bark smooth and pale like bone, branches curling at odd angles. Once we passed what I thought was a person crouching behind a log. I called out, "Hey, hey, are you hurt?" No response. We crept closer. I reached out with my stick and nudged the figure gently. It collapsed like it had never been a person. Just bark, old clothing, and moss twisted into a human shape. But someone had taken the time to dress it. A flannel shirt, worn jeans, hiking boots, rotted at the seams. Camille leaned close, touched the collar, and whispered, "This shirt's from REI." I looked at the collar tag. Sure enough, brand new, barely faded. There was a scrap of receipt paper stuffed in the pocket. I opened it slowly. The words were smeared but readable. March 5th, 2023, exit trail blocked. Camped overnight. Something out there. Can't stay another night. Today was March 9th. We pushed on. Eventually we reached a creek, narrow, fast-flowing, the water cold and clear. Camille dropped to her knees and drank straight from it, despite everything we knew about filtering. I let her. We were past the point of rules. As I filled our bottle, I saw something upstream, just a flicker, barely a shape. It looked like a person crouched in the water, maybe bathing. Pale skin, long arms. I called out again, quieter this time. No movement, no reaction. Then it turned its head. It had no face, just smooth, wet skin stretched across a round skull. Where its eyes should have been, the skin pulsed slightly, like something breathing from behind a curtain. It tilted its head as if listening. Then, slowly, it stood, limbs too long, joints moving the wrong way, and stepped backward into the water, disappearing without a splash. I grabbed Camille. "We're going back. Now." She resisted at first, then nodded slowly. Her ankle was swelling, but she hobbled beside me, leaning on my shoulder. We followed the creek downstream, hoping it might lead us out, or lead us somewhere. That's when we saw the first van. Same make and model as ours, same faded orange stripe. Parked in a clearing, dead still. I froze. Camille said, "That's not possible." We approached slowly. I saw it clearly. It had the exact dent in the side panel where I'd clipped a guardrail last fall in Utah. That was our van, but we were looking at it. "What the hell?" I whispered. I opened the door. The same key worked. Inside, the air was cold and dry, dusty. The back seat was empty, but the floor had drag marks, dark clawed grooves across the metal, like something had pulled itself through. On the table, our journal, my handwriting, yesterday's entry. But the pages after that were filled in with strange symbols, hundreds of them. Circles, lines, spirals that bent into each other, not written in ink, burned into the page. Camille said, "We've already been here." "No," I said, swallowing hard. "Something else has." We didn't take anything, just turned and walked away. As we moved back into the trees, I looked up once and caught a glimpse of something in the branches. Not a bird, not a squirrel. A face. Not human, but wearing one. Like a stretched mask, torn at the eyes, stitched at the mouth. It blinked once, then vanished, slipping deeper into the canopy without disturbing a single leaf. I didn't tell Camille. The sun, or what passed for it, was starting to dim again. We came back to our own van just before dark. It was right where we'd left it. But now the side window had been smashed in. Shards of glass glistened across the front seat, and carved into the windshield from the inside were 4 words: "You shouldn't have come." I checked the locks. The doors were still shut, no signs of forced entry, except for the broken glass, but that wasn't what chilled me. It was the carvings. They were written in my handwriting. Perfect match. I didn't sleep that night. Camille was shivering again, and at some point she started muttering in her sleep. I leaned in, trying to make out the words. "Digging," she whispered. Still digging. So many doors, all open now. I pressed my hand to her forehead, burning hot. The fever had come back, but her skin was ice cold. And then, around 3 a.m., we heard it again, not dragging this time. Knocking. Slow. Deliberate. 3 taps on the side of the van. Silence. Then again, on the other side. I grabbed the axe, held my breath. A voice followed. A child's voice. "Can I come in now?" The knock came again, louder this time. 3 slow taps. A child's voice, soft, polite, and wrong in every possible way, asked again, "Can I come in now?" Camille stirred in her seat. I put a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Stay down." Her skin was still cold, but her eyes fluttered open. I could see she'd heard it too. We didn't speak, just listened. A pause, then footsteps, bare feet on gravel. Too light to be an adult, too rhythmic to be an animal. Circling the van slowly, I gripped the axe until my knuckles ached. Camille pulled her knees to her chest, mouth trembling. Then the voice again, on the other side. "You said I could." The words were slurred, stretched like a scratched cassette tape, like a memory being played back at the wrong speed. I moved slowly, silently toward the front seat and looked through the cracks in the broken window. Nothing. Only trees, only fog. Then, a hand slapped the windshield. Small, pale, 5 fingers, no fingernails, just smooth flesh, as if the body had been formed but never finished. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just watched as the thing leaned closer, pressing its face against the glass. And that's when I saw it wasn't a child. It wore a child's face. But the features were too symmetrical, too soft, like wax poured into a mold. And its eyes, where the irises should have been, were pits of dark earth. Something was moving behind them. Crawling. Camille whispered behind me, "Don't look at it." I turned away. The thing waited. It stood there, silent now, watching. Then, finally, it left. No footsteps, no sound of movement. Just gone. But something in the air changed. Like pressure lifting from a room. Like the forest had exhaled. We didn't sleep. We just waited for light. If you could call what came next light. A fog rolled in so thick we could barely see the hood of the van. The trees were no longer trees. They were shadows with weight. Blurred verticals in every direction. I said, "We're driving out." Fog or no fog. Camille didn't argue. I turned the key. The engine cranked. Once, twice. Nothing. The battery had power. The dash lights flickered, but the engine refused to turn over, like something in the van didn't want to leave. I opened the hood. Everything looked fine. Dry. Nothing chewed, nothing leaking. And then I noticed the dirt, packed in tight under the engine block. Rich, red Georgia clay. Still wet, like someone had shoveled it in overnight. Camille stood behind me, barefoot again, swaying. Hey, what are you doing?" She blinked slowly, eyes unfocused. "They told me you'd stop me." I grabbed her shoulders. Camille, what are you talking about? She looked past me into the fog. They need someone to stay. No one's staying. You hear me? But she wasn't hearing me. She was hearing them. I turned and caught movement just for a second. Something tall, moving sideways across the clearing behind the trees. It didn't walk, it floated. Shoulders twitching unnaturally, limbs trailing behind like seaweed. There was no time. We couldn't stay. We couldn't drive. So we ran. Left everything, food, vans, supplies, and plunged into the fog on foot. Camille didn't resist. She followed like a ghost, quiet and light. The woods swallowed us. The trees grew closer together, the ground sloped downward, and the smell changed. Not rot. Worse. Decay. Like something ancient left to fester under stone. We found the door again, not the van door. The door. The metal trapdoor in the woods. It was open now. Wide, with steps carved into the dirt beneath it. Stone steps, lined with carvings I didn't recognize. Camille stopped walking. She looked down into the darkness. They're waiting. No, I said, pulling her back. We're not going down there. I already did, she said. What? I did, last night. I just don't remember how I got back. My chest locked up. I stared into the pit. Something breathed down there. The air pulsed like a lung. Cold, wet. And I realized then, we were never supposed to find the road. The woods brought us back here. Every trail, every loop, every false turn, all leading here. This place is older than the forest, Camille whispered. Older than memory. It's been feeding off grief for generations. Loss is the doorway, and we opened it. I shook my head. No, this isn't you talking. But even as I said it, I saw the truth. I'd brought my grief into these woods like a blood offering. I had wanted silence, stillness. I thought I needed it, but this place didn't offer peace. It offered reflection, twisted, amplified. I backed away from the pit. The forest groaned around us, louder now. Branches shook without wind. The fog pulsed. Shapes began to emerge, figures half seen, faces we'd known. My father, her grandmother, friends long gone, all smiling, and beneath the smile, emptiness. Camille took a step forward. I stepped in front of her. You're not going down there. Tears rolled down her cheeks. It's already inside me. I didn't know what to say, so I did the only thing I could. I struck the flare. It burned hot and red in my hand, casting wild shadows through the trees. The forest recoiled for a second like a lung gasping. I tossed the flare into the pit. It didn't hit bottom, just vanished into blackness. A second later, a sound rose up. Not a scream, a chorus, 100 voices all shrieking in unison. Every octave, human, animal, infantile, a rising howl of rage. The trees convulsed. The dirt around the pit began to collapse. Camille screamed, her voice this time, and we ran. We didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't speak. Somewhere, hours later, we found a ranger station. Abandoned. Half collapsed. But the radio worked, just long enough to transmit coordinates before dying. They found us the next morning, or what they said was morning. They told us we were 40 miles from where our van had been parked. Said they'd never seen a vehicle get that deep in the wilderness. Said we were lucky. I didn't correct them. I didn't tell them about the van we saw that looked just like ours, or the door, or what was beneath it. They wouldn't have believed me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But I know this. We left something behind. Something followed us out. And sometimes late at night, when the air gets still and the trees lean too close to the house, I swear I hear it again. 3 knocks, always 3. That sound follows me now. Not always in the literal sense. Sometimes it's subtle. A tap behind the drywall at 3 a.m. A creak in the RV floorboards when we haven't moved. Sometimes I hear it in hotel rooms, campgrounds, even in the damn grocery store freezer aisle once. Just a knock from somewhere behind the row of frozen peas. I'll freeze, hold my breath, count. 1, 2, 3. And it always stops at 3. Because that's the question, isn't it? Can I come in now? The thing is, I think I already let it in. I think we both did. After the forest, we tried to pretend we were okay. We even kept camping. Different state, different forests. Big, open skies, new mountains, more people. But it didn't matter, something had changed. The woods never felt like woods again. They felt inhabited. Alive, but not in the way nature is. It felt like being watched through a 2-way mirror. Camille started waking up with scratches on her ankles, little bruises on her arms that looked like fingerprints. At first, we blamed the bunk, the edge of the cabinets, the usual clumsy camper stuff. but there were no sharp edges where the bruises appeared, and the scratches always came in threes. I still don't know if anything ever left that place, or if we brought something back in ourselves. Maybe the woods in Georgia were just a gate, a tear in the ground. What's worse, that it followed us, or that part of us never left. I started seeing reflections that weren't mine, not in mirrors, but in windows, glossy surfaces, the rear view. I'd catch my own silhouette at night, glance away, then back, only to find it still staring in the wrong direction, not moving, just waiting for me to notice. Once in Colorado, we stayed at a KOA off a quiet highway. I woke up to someone whispering from the picnic table outside our camper. It was Camille's voice, only she was asleep next to me. I looked out. There she was, sitting at the table, facing away, hair down, shoulders hunched like she used to when she was sad. I opened the door and said her name. The figure turned, and there was no face, just skin stretched over a hollow skull. I slammed the door, locked it, held Camille in my arms until sunrise. The next morning, she didn't remember anything, but she looked thinner, paler. Her hands shook when she poured her coffee. We stopped camping after that, sold the van, got an apartment in Asheville with thick walls and no trees nearby. We tried to live like people again. We planted flowers on the balcony, tried therapy, sleep meds, clean diets. But some things don't unroot. They're in you now. And that's the part I need people to understand. It's not about monsters. Not really. It's about places. There are places in this country that remember. Places that don't want to be touched. Places that never stopped taking. The Cohutta Wilderness is one of them. And I don't care what your GPS says, or how good the reviews are from some overlanding blog, or how peaceful it looks on YouTube. There are trails in North Georgia that weren't made by rangers. There are roads that lead you into a memory that isn't yours. And when you realize the place has already shaped itself around your grief, you'll understand the question doesn't come from something outside the door. It comes from inside you. Can I come in now? Wouldn't it be easier to just say yes? To open it? To give in? I think about that sometimes. What would have happened if I hadn't pulled Camille away from the pit? If I had climbed down? If I had followed the voice that sounded like my father's? Maybe it wouldn't have hurt. Maybe it would have felt like peace. That's how it gets you. That's how it always gets you. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Not everything that offers comfort means you well. Not every silence is sacred, and not every forest is lost. Some of them are waiting for you to feel tired enough, broken enough, curious enough. So hear me now. Don't go RV camping in Georgia's wilderness. Not deep, not off-grid, not where the trail signs are rusted and the trees grow too close. Because if you hear something moving through the brush at night, something dragging, if you see your loved one talking in their sleep to someone who isn't there, if you find doors where no buildings should exist, you are not lost. You're being guided. And the thing guiding you, it wants you to remember what you buried. It wants to offer you exactly what you miss most. It'll sound like your father's voice. It'll smell like your childhood home. It'll wear the face of your first pet, your favorite teacher, your late sibling. It'll knock 3 times and it'll ask, "Can I come in now?" You'll want to say yes, but don't. Please, don't. Because once you do, you're never really yours again. There's a certain silence that doesn't belong in the Florida Keys. I didn't know that until I heard it. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like being watched. We weren't looking for trouble. We just wanted warmth, a bit of salt in the air, and a break from the late winter chill gripping the rest of the country. I'd bought my Volkswagen Westfalia a year earlier, a beaten 1984 with faded orange trim and more rust than resale value, and I'd spent the better part of a year fixing it up with my girlfriend, Marissa. She was the kind who didn't mind the smell of old gas and mildew, who actually found peace in roadside stops and the soft creak of a van swaying in the wind. We left from Tennessee that January, aiming for the kind of trip people posted about. Soft ocean light, alligator sightings from safe distances, sweat-slicked skin under hammocks between mangroves. Nothing planned. No hotel bookings. Just the open road and a few scrawled campground names in a notebook wedged between the sun visors. By the time we reached the Keys, we'd already done 3 nights in state parks and a night parked behind a crusty bait shop in Key Largo. We weren't exactly fresh. Sand stuck to everything, and the van had taken on the unmistakable funk of 2 people living in close quarters without a working fan. It was a late afternoon when we first saw the sign. It was hand-painted on a piece of driftwood nailed to a crooked fence post just past a long bend on a side road we'd taken looking for a gas station. Faded red paint, letters crooked and barely legible. Welcome campers, y la vida, fresh catch, friendly locals, safe rest. Marissa leaned forward. That doesn't show up on the map. I squinted. Looks private. Private usually means quiet. She was smiling like she already knew she'd convinced me. The turnoff was narrow and overgrown, palmettos crowding the edge of the gravel. The GPS lost signal the second we turned in. We passed a rusted-out gate hanging open and a battered mailbox that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But then, like something out of a fever dream, we rolled into a tiny town that seemed alive with color. Not just alive, welcoming. Dozens of pastel houses clustered around a central square with a chipped white gazebo. Yellow string lights dangled from the palms. A few locals sat on porches drinking what looked like iced tea, waving lazily as we passed. Kids played barefoot in the streets, riding old bikes with streamers and screaming in delight like time hadn't passed them by. A broad-shouldered man in a wide straw hat waved us down and gestured toward a gravel lot beside what used to be a seafood restaurant. Park anywhere you like, he called with a thick Keys accent. Free for travelers. We take care of our own. Marissa looked at me. I should have said no. I should have felt something twist in my gut then, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I smiled and waved back. Thanks, man. This place is beautiful. He grinned wider. Just don't leave after dark. It gets disorienting. He laughed after he said it like it was a joke, and so did we. That night, they fed us. We joined them under a huge canvas awning strung up near the gazebo. Long tables, fresh mahi-mahi grilled right there in front of us, buckets of cold beer, tiki torches flickering like we dropped into a Caribbean postcard. They introduced themselves in that way small towns do, like they'd always known us and we'd simply forgotten them. There was Sarah, the woman who ran the general store, her arms thick and tan from decades of lifting crates of mangoes and dry goods. There was Joseph, the man in the straw hat who seemed to float between tables like some kind of unofficial mayor, slapping backs and handing out plantains glazed with honey. There was a boy, maybe 7, who stared at me far too long for a child, and when I smiled and waved, he simply blinked and turned away. It was Marissa who noticed first. The quiet. I don't hear any bugs, she whispered as we lay in the van that night, doors cracked for air. There's no frogs, no wind, not even the ocean. I pressed my ear against the pillow and realized she was right. The torches had gone out. The laughter and music had vanished without the usual trickle of goodbyes or people shuffling home. It was like the whole town had turned off all at once. Maybe it's just this spot, I whispered back and tried not to admit how deeply the quiet had settled into my bones. We drifted off eventually, but I woke just before dawn. I didn't know why. I didn't hear anything, not really, but I felt hollow, like something had scraped part of me clean while I slept. The van felt colder than it should. My breath fogged the windows, and outside, through the windshield, I saw nothing but mist. I sat up slowly. Every instinct I had told me not to open the door, but I did anyway. And the town was gone, not destroyed, not abandoned in the way people leave slowly over years. It was empty, like it had never been lived in, like the paint had been fake, the houses hollow shells. The string lights were gone. The gazebo looked collapsed under vines that hadn't been there 12 hours ago, and not a single person remained. Marissa, I said, and the sound of my own voice startled me. She sat up, dazed, rubbed her eyes, looked around. Where? We got out of the van together. I kept expecting anyone, to come out and laugh, say we'd fallen for some elaborate prank. Maybe it was a TV show, a tourist trap, a weird art installation. But the more we walked, the more we realized it wasn't just empty, it was wrong. The general store was a burnt-out ruin. The restaurant, a collapsed heap with vines as thick as arms choking the rafters. The bikes the kids rode, rusted solid, flat tires, chains eaten through. Even the gravel lot had weeds bursting through cracks we knew hadn't been there yesterday. "Are we dreaming?" Marissa whispered. I didn't answer, because I heard something then. Not footsteps, not voices. It was humming. Low, monotone, inhuman, and it was coming from the tree line. The humming wasn't music. It didn't rise or fall. It didn't carry a rhythm. It was just one long, low sound, like something was breathing electricity through the trees. It vibrated in my chest more than in my ears, like a distant generator with no source, no off switch. Marissa grabbed my arm. Her fingers were ice cold. I turned and saw the fear in her eyes, the way her mouth trembled, but no sound came out. We both knew, without saying it, that this wasn't just some abandoned town with weird acoustics. Something was still here. "Back in the van," I muttered. We ran. I didn't care that the windshield was fogged. I didn't care that we hadn't checked the road. I started the engine on instinct, gripping the wheel like it was the only real thing left in the world. But the van wouldn't start. The engine clicked, coughed. The battery wasn't dead. We had charged it the day before, I was sure of it, but something had its fingers in the machinery. Something didn't want us leaving. "Try again," Marissa whispered. She was rocking slightly now, eyes darting toward the trees where the humming grew louder. I tried again. Click, click. A hiss like steam from a pipe erupted from under the hood. That's when I saw movement between the trees. Not walking, not running. Just a shiver of dark shapes gliding between trunks like they were weightless, like smoke moving with intention. "Out," I said. "What?" "We're not staying in this van. If we can't drive, we're not staying still." I didn't have a plan. I had survival instinct, and right then it was screaming at me to move. We bolted. We didn't take anything. Not food, not water, not our phones or maps. We ran in the direction the road should have been, but after only 50 yards, the gravel disappeared beneath our feet, and we found ourselves stepping into sand and cracked concrete. The road was gone. In its place was an overgrown trail that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Not a car tire, not even a footprint. The town wasn't just empty. It had never been there. We walked for hours, or maybe longer. Time lost shape in that place. The trees pressed in tight, hanging moss draped like old fabric from twisted branches. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. There was no sound now, not even birds. Just the crunch of our own feet on dead leaves and the snap of twigs that didn't echo like they should have. At one point, we found a broken road sign, half buried in sand. It said, "Isla Vida, 1 mile," but the paint was flaking off, the letters curled and faded. It looked 50 years old. I turned to Marissa. "That's where we just were. Isla Vida." She nodded, barely. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. I knelt down next to the sign. There were scratch marks on the back of the post, not made by animals. These were letters, crudely carved. "They don't leave. They never left. Time doesn't move here." I read it aloud without meaning to. She staggered back. "Stop." I looked up. Her eyes were locked on something behind me. I turned. There was a house. An old stilt house, gray and half collapsed, standing in the middle of a mangrove thicket. The air around it felt colder, still humming, but quieter now, like it had moved beneath the ground. I don't know why we approached it. Maybe we hoped someone was inside. Maybe we thought if we could just find something human, we could anchor ourselves back to reality. The steps groaned as we climbed. The front door was ajar, hanging on one hinge. Inside, the floor was warped from water damage. Paint peeled from the ceiling like dried skin. And on the far wall, photos. Dozens of them. Marissa covered her mouth. They were Polaroids. Taped in neat rows, yellowing at the edges, people all different ages and backgrounds, some alone, some in groups, all smiling like vacation snapshots. Behind them, I recognized the pastel houses, the string lights, the seafood shack. A couple stood out, a young man and woman sitting on the roof of a Volkswagen van. My van. My face. Marissa's face. We stared at ourselves in the photo. We were laughing. Carefree. Lit by golden hour sunlight, but the photo was old. Decades old. The paper had curled at the corners, the color faded like something pulled from a time capsule. I touched it. It was warm. Something shifted behind us. A thump, soft but heavy, like footsteps in waterlogged shoes. We didn't turn around. We ran. The trail twisted as we bolted out of the house. Trees blurred past, branches slapping at our arms and faces. My lungs felt like they were filled with mud. The light was changing, reddening, flattening, as if the sun had stalled in mid-descent and could go no further. We emerged into a clearing. A small circle of sand, empty except for a wooden sign nailed to a post. "You made it back." Marissa stopped short. "Back to what?" I turned slowly. The trail behind us was gone, vanished. No broken branches, no tracks, just an unbroken wall of green. The humming stopped. Silence rolled in like a fog. And then, laughter. Not joyful laughter. Close, all around us. I turned in circles, heart hammering. "Where are you?" But I knew. They weren't people. Not anymore. Maybe they never were. We saw the figures emerge slowly from the trees. Same clothes, same smiles, same faces as the ones in the Polaroids, but faded. Too still. They moved like puppets. One stepped forward. It was Joseph, or something wearing his face. He grinned, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "You left too early," he said, voice syrupy. We weren't done. I backed up, but there was nowhere to go. The clearing was a bowl, ringed by trees so thick we'd have to claw through them. Marissa gripped my hand. "What do you want?" I shouted. Joseph tilted his head. "You were happy here. Everyone is, for a while." Behind him, the others gathered, silent, watching. Then he raised his hand and pointed behind us. We turned. The van was sitting there, right in the middle of the clearing. Pristine. Sunlight gleaming off the windshield like nothing had ever gone wrong. Its engine idling, door open, keys hanging from the ignition. Marissa took a step forward. I grabbed her arm. No, that's not ours. That's bait." She stopped. The humming began again, louder, faster, pounding in my chest like a second heartbeat. I looked back at the figures, but they were gone. And so was the forest. And so was the clearing. We were standing on pavement, a highway shoulder. Cars roared past in the distance, and in front of us, our van, our actual van, rusted, a little crooked with a mangrove branch stuck in the grill, still running. I didn't ask questions. I got in. So did she. We didn't talk. Not for hours, not until we reached a gas station in Key West and sat in silence staring at the nothingness inside our coffees. She finally whispered, "How long were we gone?" I looked at my watch. It said 6:12 a.m. Same time we'd woken up. Same day. I didn't answer, because the van's odometer read 0, like we'd never left. That night, we didn't sleep. We parked at a 24-hour Walgreens in Key West, surrounded by streetlights and the dull hum of civilization. But neither of us trusted the darkness anymore. I kept the engine running. I didn't know what it would do, or if it would vanish like everything else had, but I couldn't bear the silence again. Marissa sat curled in the passenger seat, hugging her knees. Her face was streaked with salt, maybe from tears, maybe sweat. Her voice was brittle when she finally spoke. "You saw it, didn't you? That photo, it was us. But it couldn't have been." I nodded. "It was us. Or something pretending to be." She turned to look at me. "Do you think they were ever real? The people? The town?" I don't know. That was the truth. I didn't know what Isla Vida was. I didn't know if it was a place, a trap, or something worse. Something that mimics comfort, the illusion of community, only to feed on people who wander too far off the map. I pulled out my phone. Signal was back. GPS was working. But when I searched Isla Vida, nothing came up. Not on Google, not on maps, not in old travel forums. It wasn't listed under Monroe County or in the Keys or anywhere in the state of Florida. It didn't exist. And yet, I could still taste the grilled mahi-mahi. I could still feel the coarse linen of the tablecloths under my fingers. I could remember the warmth of Joseph's hand on my shoulder, that casual friendliness that felt just a little too eager. That place knew us. Or it learned fast. 2 days later, we tried to tell someone. We stopped by a ranger station near Bahia Honda, thinking maybe someone there had heard of weird spots like Isla Vida, places that didn't show up on maps, disappearances, urban legends, anything. The ranger was polite, young guy, clean uniform, sunglasses, clipboard in hand. When I mentioned the name, his brow wrinkled. "Isla Vida?" he repeated. "Can't say I've heard of it. You sure you didn't mean Isla Morada?" "No," I said slowly. "It was called Isla Vida. There were houses, a gazebo, a seafood shack, people living there." He glanced toward the back office, then leaned closer. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "The Keys are full of ghost towns, old fishing outposts, smuggler camps, places that got wiped out in hurricanes and never rebuilt. People claim all kinds of weird stuff down here. Phantom lights, lost boats, vanishing docks. Most of it's just weather and rum." "We have photos," Marissa said quietly. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the disposable camera we'd been using for the trip. I'd snapped a few shots that night of the crowd, the gazebo, the food. We went to get them developed in a CVS that afternoon. Every single image came out black. Not blurry, not underexposed, just pure black. The technician said it looked like the film had been exposed to radiation, like it had been cooked from the inside. I didn't tell the ranger that. We left. Something was wrong with the van. It didn't stall, it didn't make strange noises, it just felt off. The air inside was heavier, like someone had sealed the doors with wet towels and turned up the humidity. The AC stopped working entirely, and even on the brightest days, shadows clung to the corners like they had weight. Marissa stopped talking as much. She stared out the window a lot. Once I caught her mumbling something to herself, over and over. "What are you saying?" I asked. She blinked and looked at me like she didn't know she'd spoken. I don't know." We pulled over in Marathon to stretch our legs. I went inside a gas station for snacks and water. When I came back out, she was gone. I found her 5 minutes later, walking down a side street in a daze, barefoot. "Marissa." She turned slowly. I heard someone call me. They said my name. Her voice was flat, lifeless. "There's no one here," I said, gently steering her back to the van. "I know, but it sounded like your voice." We tried to drive north, back through the upper Keys, back toward Miami, but the GPS started glitching. Every time we checked the route, the blue line curved away from the highway and back down toward the lower islands. Even when we shut the phone off, I'd look up and realize we'd missed a turn, or taken a wrong exit without meaning to. It was like the van didn't want us leaving, or like something else was steering. We reached a toll plaza near the 7-mile bridge. I rolled down the window, ready to ask the attendant for directions, but there was no one in the booth. No cars behind us. The ocean was flat and still, stretching out to the horizon like polished metal. And there, far in the distance on the shoreline, I saw it. The pastel rooftops, the gazebo, the fishing pier. Isla Vida. It was there, waiting. That night, we parked it in a rest stop just before the bridge. We were too tired to keep driving, too paranoid to sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement behind the van. Not animals, footsteps, soft, deliberate, padding on sand and gravel. I didn't move. I held my breath. The footsteps circled the van twice, slow and even, like someone was examining it. Then 3 distinct knocks on the back window. I turned and looked. No one was there. But written in the condensation on the glass, in a child's sloppy scrawl, was one word: "Stay." I didn't sleep after that. Marissa wanted to turn around. She said it would be better to face it, to go back, to understand what it was. She said maybe we weren't supposed to leave in the first place. That maybe Isla Vida was something we stumbled into because it was meant for us. She was different now, softer, quieter, like something had carved her hollow and filled her with fog. But I remembered the eyes of those people, the ones in the clearing, the ones who didn't blink, the ones who wore their own faces like masks. I remembered Joseph saying, "You were happy here. Everyone is. For a while." I told her we were never going back. We made it to Miami 3 days later. Stayed in a motel, real beds, real electricity. A cat wandered the parking lot, and it was the most normal thing I'd seen in weeks. We tried to move on, to forget. But something followed us. Marissa started sleepwalking. She'd get up in the middle of the night and unlock the front door. Once I caught her halfway down the street, barefoot again, whispering, "I hear them singing." I started locking the door from the inside and hiding the keys. She got quieter, stopped eating, stopped responding to her name. And then, one morning, she was gone. No note, no warning, no signs of struggle, just gone. The van was gone too. I filed a report. I told the police everything except the truth. What could I say? That a smiling man in a straw hat invited us to dinner in a town that doesn't exist anymore? They said people disappear sometimes in the Keys, especially drifters, especially those without roots. A week later, I got a postcard. It had no return address. Just one photo, the gazebo, new string lights, fresh paint, Marissa sitting on the bench, barefoot, holding a drink, smiling, and written across the back in that same sloppy scrawl, "We never left." I stared at that postcard for an hour before I could breathe again. It shouldn't have been possible. It was postmarked from somewhere in Miami, But there was no address, no sender, no digital trail. Just my name, scribbled in barely legible handwriting, and the photo. It wasn't just any photo. It was current. Marissa was wearing a shirt she'd bought 2 days before she disappeared. One we'd picked up at a thrift shop in Little Havana. Bright teal with faded pink flamingos. She looked clean. Relaxed. Her hair was brushed and sunlit, the kind of beach wave perfection you never actually wake up with. But the part that broke me, the part that made me sit down hard on the motel bed and feel something shatter behind my ribs, was her eyes. They were smiling, but they weren't hers. Not anymore. I thought about burning the postcard, tearing it to pieces, stuffing it in the motel room trash, pretending it was some sick prank from someone who'd followed us. But I couldn't. I kept it in the glove box. The van was gone, but I still had the key, one I had cut back in Tennessee. I held it like an anchor every time I felt myself drifting toward thoughts I didn't want to finish. Thoughts like, what if she didn't want to leave? Thoughts like, what if she's waiting for me to come back? The truth was, I didn't know if Marissa had been taken or if she'd chosen to stay. I tried to return to normal life. That lasted a week. I stayed in the motel, got a job washing dishes at a Cuban diner, paid cash under the table, ate alone, slept with the lights on. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that town, the way it changed when the sun went down, the way the people, no, the things would smile just a little too long, the way they always seemed to know what you wanted to hear. The worst part was, there was a part of me that missed it, the warmth, the illusion of safety, the community, the idea that someone was always cooking a meal, always offering a place to park, always smiling like they'd known you forever. Even if it was all a lie, it was soothing. I hated myself for craving it. One night I walked to the beach, not for the view, not for the air. I needed to be near the water. I needed to hear something real. The Atlantic was restless, waves crashing in uneven intervals. I stood at the edge of the surf, sandals in hand, wondering how far someone could swim before they disappeared. That's when I saw her, just past the breakers, standing waist deep in the water. Marissa, she was staring at me, her face calm, hair wet and hanging over her shoulders. Her mouth didn't move, but I heard her voice, clear as a bell inside my skull. Come home. I blinked. She was gone. The water rippled where she'd stood like something had just slipped beneath the surface. I left Miami that night, didn't pack, didn't check out of the motel. I stole a used road atlas from the glove box of a junked car in a mechanic's yard and circled every key, every side road, every inlet that might take me back to that place. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to find Isla Vida again, to see it with new eyes, to see if what I remembered was real or something else entirely. Maybe it was closure, maybe it was madness, but I had to go back. I borrowed a car from a man I met behind the diner, someone who didn't ask questions, just handed over the keys when I handed him 3 days' pay in cash. It was a beat-up Jeep Cherokee with sand in the floorboards and a Jesus fish dangling from the mirror. I drove south, past Key Largo, past Islamorada, past everything that had once felt like vacation. I kept my eyes open for that same turnoff, the one with the driftwood sign, the crooked post. But it was gone. Every mile I drove, the weight in my chest grew heavier, that sinking sense of moving toward something I shouldn't remember but couldn't forget. I reached the lower keys just after sunset, and then I saw it. Not the road, not the sign, but the van, my old VW Westfalia, parked just off the shoulder in a clearing of palm scrub, covered in salt and dirt, but intact. Engine off, windows cracked, like it had been waiting. I stopped the Jeep, got out slowly. The air was thick again, humming faintly, just beneath the surface of sound. I walked to the van and touched the driver's side door. Warm. Inside, the keys were hanging in the ignition, and in the rearview mirror, I saw her, Marissa. Sitting in the back seat, cross-legged, smiling. I spun around, heart thundering, but the van was empty. Still, the smell of her perfume clung to the air, that soft jasmine scent she always wore, even on camping trips, even when we hadn't showered in 3 days. I got in. The engine started on the first try. I didn't tell it where to go. It already knew. The road twisted through black mangroves and ghostly palms. I didn't see any road signs, just a string of glass lanterns hanging from the trees every few hundred yards. flickering with yellow light like fireflies too tired to move. And then, there it was. Isla Vida. Isla Vida. Just like before. The pastel houses, the gazebo, the smiling people waving from porches like they'd been waiting for me to come home. But something had changed. Their faces, they weren't pretending anymore. They weren't masking it. Their eyes too wide, their jaws too loose, their movements too smooth, like mannequins brought to life. But the illusion was still perfect. The food, the music, the warmth, and her. Marissa. Waiting at the gazebo. I parked and stepped out. She ran to me, wrapped her arms around my neck. "You came back," she whispered. "I should have pulled away. I should have run, but I didn't. Because I wanted it to be real. Because I was so tired. Because I missed her." She took my hand and led me to the table. The townsfolk cheered. Joseph raised a glass. "Welcome home," he said. "You're just in time for the festival." I sat beside her, watched the sun dip below the palms, let the warmth wash over me like honey, and I whispered to myself, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe this is enough. That night, the sky didn't go black. It settled into a deep, impossible twilight, a blue that hung over everything like wet silk, soft and endless. The stars didn't come out, the wind didn't rise, the tide didn't shift. It was as though time had bent around the island like warm glass and decided not to move forward anymore. They called it a festival. The locals danced barefoot in the square. Drums echoed without musicians. Lights flickered in rhythms too complex to be random, too precise to be controlled by humans. And still, the food came. Platters of grilled fish, roasted vegetables that smelled like sugar and smoke, and drinks that never emptied, no matter how long you held the glass. Marissa sat beside me the entire time. Her smile didn't fade. Her eyes tracked mine constantly, but never blinked too often. Never cried, never questioned, and that's when I knew. It wasn't her, not anymore. It had her face, her voice, her softness. But there were no fingerprints in her touch, no heat, no small human imperfections, just stillness, wrapped in flesh. Whatever it was wearing her. I stared into my cup and tried to remember the sound of her real laugh. The way she used to laugh, snort when she was caught off guard, the way she would tap her thumbs together when she was nervous. But all I could hear now was the humming, that endless subterranean song that trembled beneath everything, even in my bones. "I missed you," she said, suddenly turning her face to mine. Her breath didn't fog the air. I swallowed. "How long have you been here?" She tilted her head, a tiny mechanical gesture. "There's no time here. Just now, and always." "Are you happy?" "I am full," she said. "Not content, not safe, not whole, just full." I stood up slowly, feeling the eyes of the crowd press against my skin. Everyone had paused, mid-bite, mid-step, mid-laughter, as though they'd all been connected to the same invisible string that had just been tugged. Joseph appeared at my side. He wasn't smiling anymore. "You're thinking of leaving again," he said, almost sadly. I didn't answer. He stepped closer, his voice like syrup poured over stone. "You don't get many second chances, friend. Not in this world. Not out there." "I didn't ask for a second chance," I said. He leaned in. "But you took it. You parked again. You came back. You said yes the moment you stepped out of that van." And I had. I hated how true that felt. I slipped away when the drums got louder, when the crowd spun into faster, more frantic movements, their limbs bending in impossible arcs under the starless sky. I walked the dirt path back toward the van, weaving through silhouettes that didn't speak or blink, only turned to face me as I passed. Marissa followed. She never said my name, never called out, just walked behind me exactly 30 feet, never more, never less. I got to the van. The keys were still in the ignition, engine cold. I turned the key once. It clicked. Again. Nothing. Again. A deep groan, like something old and reluctant trying to wake up after too many years of sleep. But it didn't start. I hit the wheel. Come on. Don't do this again." And then I heard her breath beside the window. "I don't want you to leave." I turned. She stood outside the driver's door, one hand pressed to the glass. Her face was no longer soft. It had gone slack. Her pupils were too wide, the edges of her irises swallowed by a liquid black that flickered slightly with each breath. "You said you missed me," I whispered. "I did. I do. But we're not meant to stay apart." Her voice was layered now, not echoed, not mechanical, layered, like something was speaking through her or with her. I backed away, sliding over the passenger seat and out the other side of the van. The forest was dense ahead, thicker than I remembered, but I ran anyway. Branches whipped my arms, drew blood across my cheek. I could hear footsteps behind me, soft and unhurried, like she wasn't chasing, just following. I didn't stop. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I stumbled into a clearing, and I saw another van. Same model, same rust pattern, same cracked back window from that night in the Everglades when a raccoon jumped up trying to get inside, but it was different, because we were in it. Me, Marissa, a version of us sitting peacefully, eating mango slices and talking like nothing had ever gone wrong. I stood frozen. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a hallucination. It was happening now, except it wasn't. I watched my other self laugh and brush a hand through his hair, watched her lean into him and say something soft. Then they both looked up, directly at me, and smiled, not startled, not confused, just calm, welcoming. Behind me, the humming returned, deeper now, resonant, like the whole island was singing through the roots. The trees shifted, the clearing shimmered, and the vision, if that's what it was, vanished like smoke. I kept running, past burnt-out cottages, collapsed porches, moldy gazebos that no longer held shape. The entire town began to decompose as I moved, fading into ruin, into swamp, into silence, like the illusion only worked if I believed in it, and I didn't anymore. Because the more I fought, the more I remembered. The cold, the silence, the blank eyes. This wasn't a paradise. It was a trap, a loop, a beautiful polished net made of memory and longing and warmth. But all it did was devour. I reached the old road, the one with the driftwood sign. It was hanging again, but the letters had changed. They didn't say, "Welcome campers, y la vida." They said, "You can still leave, but she can't." I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, breath ragged. I didn't know if I could make it out. I didn't know if the sign was lying, but I knew I couldn't go back. Not again. I turned and looked behind me. No one there. Just trees, and a faint, aching perfume in the air. Jasmine. I walked until my feet blistered, until the humming faded, until the sky turned real black, not that flat, dreamy twilight. And then I saw the lights of the highway, headlights, tailpipes, the roar of rubber on pavement, and I dropped to my knees and cried. Not for her, not for what I saw, but for how long I almost stayed. I didn't speak for days. When someone eventually found me, an older Cuban couple who pulled over at the side of the highway, asking if I was okay, I couldn't tell them anything useful, just shook my head, asked for water, sat in the back of their truck, and tried to remember what real air tasted like. I slept in their guest room for 2 nights. They never pressed me for answers. They just gave me food, clean clothes, silence. It was the first time in weeks I hadn't heard humming when I closed my eyes. But even then, even far away from the Keys, I knew Y La Vida wasn't done with me. The postcard came again, this time delivered directly to the couple's mailbox. Same photo, same message. Only one word had changed. She's waiting. I moved inland, or tried to. I ditched the phone, got rides from truckers, wandered west through orange groves and cracked dirt towns, just trying to put distance between me and the ocean. The farther I got from salt air, the more normal things felt. But some nights I'd wake up in my sleeping bag with sand between my toes. Other times I'd swear I heard her voice whispering just outside my tent flap, calling my name in that sweet, familiar way, like she was teasing me to come down for breakfast. It wasn't memory. It wasn't grief. It was reach. That place, that thing, could still reach me, no matter where I went. I finally found an old mechanic's shack near the edge of the Everglades, run by a man named Clay. He didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't offer many answers. I worked for him, cash under the table, mostly alone, rebuilding engines, stripping down old swamp boats, cleaning spark plugs until my hands were permanently blackened. He had an Airstream parked out back, half buried in sawgrass. Said I could sleep there. I did. I locked the door every night, bolted it from the inside. I lined the windows with duct tape and cardboard. I kept salt by the door. Sometimes I'd wake to knocking, never loud, never urgent. Just 3 soft taps on the back hatch. Always 3. Always waiting. I never opened it. One morning, Clay handed me a package. Said it had come from some delivery guy who looked too clean to be local. It was wrapped in brown paper, no return label. Inside, a VHS tape, and a note written in blocky, unnatural handwriting, "You left something behind." I didn't have a player. But the gas station 5 miles up the road rented old movies out of a dust-covered Redbox knockoff machine, and their manager had one behind the counter. He let me use it. I pushed the tape in, already sweating, static. Then, footage. Me and Marissa, inside the van, at night, eating, laughing, a candle flickering between us. I don't remember this night. I don't remember that conversation, but there we were, alive, comfortable. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and then we both stopped, at the same time. Frozen mid-sentence. Slowly we turned to look at the camera. Our eyes were blank. Not angry, not afraid, just empty. The tape cut out. I smashed it, right there in the gas station parking lot. Took a crowbar to the player too. The manager didn't even yell, just watched. Slowly reached for the phone to call someone, but I was already gone. Back in the Airstream, I dug through everything I owned, trying to remember what I'd left behind in that town, what part of myself had stayed when the rest of me ran, what hook they still had in me. The answer came at 3:11 a.m., in the form of a whisper through the aluminum shell of the trailer, so faint I almost believed it was wind. You never left. I saw her again, 2 weeks later, not in a dream, not in a hallucination, walking down a gas station aisle in Lakeland. Same teal flamingo shirt, same eyes. She turned, saw me, and smiled, but it was too quick, too prepared, like she'd been waiting to be seen. I froze. She walked away without a word, left the store, no car, no bags, just disappeared into the rows of gas pumps like vapor. I followed, but she was gone. Only one thing remained, taped to the inside of the pump glass. She still loves you. I started writing everything down after that. Every dream, every whisper, every impossible moment, not to make sense of it, but to anchor myself, because it was getting harder to tell what was real. The salt kept returning to my clothes, even ones I hadn't worn near the coast. My boots would fill with sand some mornings. The Airstream creaked like waves were brushing its sides. Clay said he never heard it, said I looked sick, that maybe I should go back where I came from, but I couldn't go back, and I couldn't go forward either. I kept thinking of those words on the sign before I left. You can still leave, but she can't. Why her? Why not me? Was it because I tried to resist? Because I broke the illusion? Because I remembered it wasn't real? Or was it something deeper? Was she already part of it before we arrived? Had she heard the humming long before I noticed? Had I been the guest all along, and she the host? I tried to track down others. There had to be someone else, someone who'd escaped Isla Vida, someone who'd written about it, posted about it. Anything. I searched for phrases like fake towns in the Keys, locals too friendly, vanishing campgrounds, places that feed. Nothing useful, just ghost stories. Until I found a blog, old, archived, titled Salt Wounds, only one post written in 2002. A man named Wes claimed he and his brother had gotten lost on a fishing trip near Big Pine Key. Found a town that wasn't on the map. Locals invited them in, cooked for them, laughed with them, slept the night. By morning, the whole place was overgrown. His brother was gone. Wes tried to return, couldn't. The last line of the post chilled me. I still hear him singing at night, the same song the locals sang when we arrived. I don't think he ever left. I think I'm the one who stayed behind. That was the last post. Wes never updated again. Maybe that's the trap. Not the town itself, not even the people. It's the idea that we want something permanent, something safe, somewhere that feels like it was made just for us. A place where time stops and comfort never ends, even if it means giving up freedom, even if it means forgetting who you are, even if it means becoming part of it. I keep the postcard now, not to remember her, but to remember myself, because I know one day the humming will start again. I'll wake up with salt in my mouth, a knock on the back window, a whisper at the edge of the forest, and the van, my old rust-covered VW, will be parked just where I left it. Engine warm, keys in the ignition, waiting. And the only question will be, will I drive away or finally stay?